Hello everyone, and welcome back to Eat Sleep Crime. I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. And like and subscribe if you are enjoying the case. Now, let's get comfy and get this show on the road. The School Remembered Chapter 1. Echoes of the past, the biting November wind whipped around Alex as he wrestled the rusted padlock on the school's heavy oak door. He hadn't been back to Havenwood in 15 years, not since he'd run. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying wood, a smell that clung to the back of his throat like a phantom cough. The once proud Havenwood Elementary School stood before him, a skeletal monument of forgotten childhoods and unspoken sorrows. Its paint peeled like sunburnt skin, revealing layers of faded colors beneath, a ghostly testament to the years of neglect and the secrets it seemed determined to keep. The building groaned under the weight of its own decay, the sound a mournful sigh in the desolate landscape. Broken windows stared out like vacant eyes, and the overgrown ivy snaked around its crumbling brickwork like grasping fingers. It was a picture of desolation, a perfect reflection of the turmoil that had driven Alex back to this forgotten corner of New England. He'd sought refuge in the anonymity of the city, hoping to bury his past under a mountain of deadlines and self-imposed isolation. But the city had failed him, its relentless noise a constant reminder of the silence he craved. Havenwood, with its oppressive quiet, seemed a perversely fitting sanctuary. He pushed the door inward with a groan of protesting hinges, stepping into a cavernous hallway shrouded in dust motes dancing in the weak shafts of light that pierced the grime-coated windows. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling. A chill deeper than the autumnal air settled on Alex's skin. It wasn't just the cold, it was a pervasive sense of dread, a palpable weight that pressed down on him, making his chest feel tight. He ran a hand along the cold, damp wall, feeling the rough texture of the crumbling plaster beneath his fingertips. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak and groan of the building settling into its own decay. The school was vast, echoing with the ghosts of laughter and childish screams that had long since faded into the abyss of time. He could almost hear the faint whispers, the echoes of games played and lessons learned, but there was also something darker, something sinister, interwoven into the fabric of the building's very essence. He walked further into the building, the floorboards groaning under his weight, each step a violation of the long-held silence. The rooms were mostly empty, stripped bare of furniture and fixtures years ago. Chalk dust still clung to the cracked blackboards, remnants of forgotten lessons and childish scribbles. He found a classroom, the faint outlines of desks still etched into the dusty floor. In the corner, a tattered textbook lay open, its pages brittle and yellowed, hinting at stories once eagerly absorbed, now lost to the passage of time. As he moved deeper into the building's heart, a growing sense of unease took hold. He found names carved into the floorboards of one classroom, etched deep into the aged wood. Names that sent a jolt of icy dread through him, names that were eerily familiar. He recognized some of them, faint memories flickering at the edges of his consciousness. Sarah Jenkins, Thomas Miller, Emily Carter, children who had vanished from Havenwood without a trace years ago, their disappearances swallowed by the town's collective amnesia. The names were not merely carved, they were branded, as if seared into the wood by some unseen hand. A primal fear, raw and visceral, coiled in his stomach. He ran a trembling hand across the names, a silent prayer on his lips that he was wrong, that this was just a cruel coincidence. But deep down, a cold certainty settled. These weren't just random carvings, they were a macabre memorial, a chilling reminder of Havenwood's hidden history. The building seemed to whisper to him, its decaying structure a silent witness to tragedies long forgotten, or deliberately suppressed. That night, sleep offered no solace. Instead, he was plunged into a maelstrom of fragmented memories, half-formed images that flickered like dying embers. He saw fleeting glimpses of children playing in the schoolyard, their laughter distorted and chilling, their faces obscured by shadows. He saw a figure lurking in the darkness, its face hidden, its movements swift and silent. He smelled the metallic tang of blood, felt the cold grip of fear around his throat, the suffocating pressure of unseen eyes. These visions weren't dreams. They felt like memories, shards of a past he had desperately tried to erase. He awoke in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs, the unsettling images clinging to the edges of his consciousness. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving him disoriented and terrified. The school was not merely a building. It was a conduit, a link to a buried past that was now bleeding into his present. The next day, as he worked on clearing debris from the main hall, he heard it. A faint whisper from the rusted intercom system. A disembodied voice, barely audible above the whistling wind. It was a child's voice, crying out for help, the sound distorted and laced with a chilling despair. He froze, his blood running cold. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, a wave of icy terror washing over him. He traced the source of the sound to the old intercom box, its wires frayed and exposed, its components coated in layers of dust and grime. He reached out, his fingers brushing the cold metal, and the voice intensified, its mournful wail echoing through the cavernous hall. He retreated, his mind racing, the implications of the voice chilling him to the bone. The school wasn't just haunted by memories. It was haunted by something far more tangible, something that was attempting to communicate, to warn him, or perhaps to lure him deeper into its dark embrace. The townsfolk were growing increasingly wary of his presence. They watched him from behind drawn curtains, their eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and fear. Their whispers followed him like shadows, their reluctance to discuss the school's past adding fuel to his growing obsession. Old Mrs. Gable, who lived across the street from the school, warned him to abandon the project. Her eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, were now dark with a chilling knowledge, a knowledge that spoke of unspeakable horrors. "Some things are best left undisturbed, Alex," she said, her voice barely a breath. "Some secrets are better buried." But Alex was past the point of retreat. The school had a hold on him, its mysteries a siren song that pulled him deeper into its dark heart. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that his own past was inextricably linked to the school's secrets, to the missing children, to the chilling events of 1973. He was no longer just renovating a building. He was excavating his own memories, unearthing the buried horrors of a past he desperately tried to forget. And with every unsettling discovery, every chilling whisper, every fragmented memory, he felt himself slipping further into the abyss, the line between sanity and madness growing ever thinner. The town of Havenwood, with its suffocating silence and its unspoken secrets, was beginning to feel like a tomb, and Alex was its unwilling prisoner. The rhythmic thud of the sledgehammer against stubborn concrete was a counterpoint to the gnawing unease that had settled deep within Alex. He'd spent the last few days clearing debris from the main hall, a Sisyphean task in a building that seemed determined to resist its own reclamation. Dust motes, disturbed by each swing, danced in the weak sunlight filtering through the grimy windows, momentarily obscuring the crumbling walls and the gnawing sense of dread that permeated the air. The weight of the school's history pressed down on him, a suffocating blanket woven from years of neglect and untold secrets. The whispers of the townsfolk, barely audible yet deeply unsettling, followed him like shadows. They spoke of a past best left undisturbed, a darkness that clung to Havenwood like the persistent fog that often rolled in from the sea. Their reticence was more frightening than any outright accusation. He paused, his arm aching, and stared at a section of floorboards near the stage. They were particularly worn, the wood bleached and scarred by years of relentless foot traffic. As he ran his hand along the aged surface, he felt a rough, almost abrasive texture in one particular spot. He knelt, his heart beginning to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs, and scraped away at the grime with a chisel. Beneath the dirt and decay, he found it. A name, deeply etched into the wood, as if branded with a searing iron. Sarah Jenkins, it read, the letters crude but unmistakable. A cold dread, sharp and visceral, pierced him. Sarah Jenkins. A name that resonated with a painful familiarity, a ghost from a forgotten past. He remembered her, vaguely, a wisp of a memory, a bright-eyed girl with pigtails, her laughter echoing in the schoolyard. Then, silence. The silence of absence, of lost. He continued to scrape, revealing more names, each one a chilling confirmation of his growing suspicion. Thomas Miller, Emily Carter, David Reynolds. All children, all vanished from Havenwood years ago, their disappearances shrouded in a suffocating veil of silence and official indifference. These weren't just names, they were epitaphs carved into the very soul of the building. Each one a silent scream trapped within the decaying wood. The discovery sent tremors through Alex, unearthing buried memories and emotions he had worked so hard to suppress. He felt a sharp pang of guilt, a sense of responsibility that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He was no longer just renovating a dilapidated school. He was excavating a grave, unearthing the buried horrors of Havenwood's past. That night, the dreams returned with a vengeance. He was back in the schoolyard, a child again, playing hide-and-seek amidst the shadows of the towering oak trees. But the laughter was distorted, echoing with a chilling undertone of fear. He saw a figure, cloaked in darkness, its face obscured by shadows, watching him from the periphery. The figure moved with an unsettling grace, its presence a silent, suffocating threat. He awoke in a cold sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs, the images clinging to the edges of his consciousness like grasping claws. The metallic tang of blood filled his nostrils, a phantom scent that sent shivers down his spine. He could almost hear the faint whispers of the children, their pleas for help barely audible above the wind's mournful wail. The line between dream and reality blurred, leaving him disoriented and terrified. He was losing his grip on sanity, the school's dark influence seeping into his very being. The following days were a blur of frantic activity interspersed with periods of debilitating fear. He continued his work on the school, driven by a compulsion he couldn't explain, yet haunted by the chilling visions that plagued his waking hours. Each new discovery only deepened the mystery, intensifying the sense of dread that clung to him like a second skin. He found a hidden room in the basement, its entrance concealed behind a false wall. Inside, he discovered a collection of old photographs, their images faded and cracked, yet bearing silent witness to the town's troubled history. He saw pictures of the missing children, their faces frozen in time, their smiles radiating a naive joy that now felt hauntingly ironic. Interspersed among the photographs were newspaper clippings detailing the disappearances, their headlines screaming of unanswered questions and growing fear. One particular clipping caught his attention. It detailed a series of unsettling events that took place in 1973, a year that resonated with a chilling familiarity, a year that seemed inextricably linked to his own fragmented memories. The article spoke of strange occurrences at the school, unexplained noises, flickering lights, and the unsettling feeling of being watched. It mentioned a series of disappearances, and the article hinted at a possible connection between the missing children and a shadowy figure who had been seen lurking near the school. As he delved deeper into the school's history, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The missing children weren't just random victims. They all seemed to have a connection to the school, a connection that remained obscured by the town's collective amnesia. Their names, their faces, their stories, all were suppressed, as if the town itself was complicit in their disappearance. The more Alex uncovered, the more he realized that his own past was inextricably linked to the school's secrets, to the missing children, and to the chilling events of 1973. He had sought refuge in the anonymity of the city, but the past, like a persistent shadow, had followed him. Havenwood was no longer just a town. It was a prison, its secrets a cage from which there seemed no escape. The town's silence was suffocating, a conspiracy of omission that felt heavier than any direct accusation. He was a prisoner of his own memories, a prisoner of Havenwood's unspoken horrors. The school, once a symbol of forgotten childhoods, had become a chilling reminder of a past he could no longer ignore, a past that was threatening to consume him entirely. He was trapped, lost in the labyrinthine corridors of a haunted past, the line between reality and nightmare fading with each terrifying revelation. The town, with its suffocating silence and hidden secrets, held its breath, waiting for the truth to surface, a truth that might shatter the fragile peace of Havenwood forever. The rhythmic clang of the hammer against the stubborn concrete had become a monotonous soundtrack to Alex's increasingly unsettling existence. Each swing was a desperate attempt to wrestle control from the oppressive silence that seemed to cling to Havenwood like a shroud. But the silence was deceptive, a fragile facade concealing a cacophony of whispers, rustling uneasily beneath the surface. These weren't the whispers of the wind through the broken windows, nor the creaks and groans of a decaying building. These were whispers that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. One afternoon, while attempting to repair a section of the damaged intercom system, a low hum filled the air, growing into a distorted, disembodied voice. It was a child's voice, faint and fragmented, murmuring an unintelligible phrase that sent shivers down Alex's spine. He froze, his hand hovering over the frayed wires, the voice fading as quickly as it had appeared. It was a phantom sound, yet the chilling echo lingered, a ghostly residue clinging to the air. He wasn't alone in this crumbling relic of a school. Something, or someone, else was present, communicating through the fractured remnants of a forgotten system. The following days brought a chilling escalation. Shadows flickered at the edge of his vision, shifting and distorting like phantoms playing tricks on his weary eyes. He'd catch glimpses of movement in the corners of his eye, only to turn and find nothing. Yet the feeling persisted, the unsettling awareness that he was constantly being watched, observed by unseen eyes. These weren't mere figments of his imagination fueled by exhaustion and the growing unease. They were increasingly vivid, unsettlingly real. The very air crackled with a palpable energy, a sense of unease so potent it was almost a physical presence. The townsfolk, initially hesitant, grew increasingly wary as Alex's renovation progressed. Their reluctance to engage in meaningful conversation deepened, replaced by furtive glances and hushed whispers that followed him like shadows. They delivered warnings veiled in cryptic pronouncements and allegorical tales, their reticence more alarming than any outright accusation. Old Mrs. Gable, her eyes like clouded pools of ancient wisdom, warned him to leave Havenwood, to abandon the school before it consumed him. Her words, though delivered kindly, carried the chilling weight of a dire premonition. Their collective unease was infectious, their silent pact a palpable barrier that Alex felt increasingly desperate to breach. Their warnings, far from deterring him, only fueled his resolve. The deeper he dug, the more he realized the town's silence wasn't simply indifference. It was a deliberate conspiracy of omission, a collective attempt to bury a dark and terrible secret. Each veiled threat, each hushed warning, was another piece in the chilling puzzle of Havenwood's hidden past. The supernatural events weren't merely unsettling. They were subtly altering his perception of reality. The line between dream and reality began to blur, leaving him disoriented and questioning his own sanity. The once familiar world around him twisted and warped, becoming a landscape of shadows and whispers, where the ordinary melted into the extraordinary, and the familiar became profoundly, terrifyingly alien. The school itself seemed to be alive, its walls whispering secrets, its shadows dancing with malevolent intent. One evening, while sorting through a box of old school records, a chilling draft snaked through the dilapidated building, extinguishing the lone lamp he'd been using. In the ensuing darkness, a disembodied voice echoed through the hall, a mournful wail that pierced the silence. The voice, though barely audible, sounded undeniably human, filled with a haunting sense of despair. He fumbled for his lighter, the flame casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist before his eyes. As he finally managed to ignite the lamp, the voices ceased, leaving behind only an unnerving silence. The experience left Alex shaken, the reality of his surroundings suddenly feeling tenuous, fragile. He was no longer simply restoring a deer-lit building. He was a participant in some horrific, unseen play, a play where the lines between the living and the dead, between reality and nightmare, were deliberately blurred. His sleep became a series of fragmented, nightmarish visions, haunted by spectral figures and whispers that clung to him like clinging shadows, pushing him closer to the precipice of madness. He tried to rationalize the occurrences, to explain away the growing unease as a product of his exhaustion, the pressure of his task. But the unsettling events refused to be dismissed, their chilling reality relentlessly chipping away at his composure. The subtle shift in his perception, the blurring of reality and nightmare, intensified until he questioned the very foundations of his own existence. He was no longer simply investigating a mystery. He was becoming the mystery. The school's influence was tangible, an unseen force that seeped into his very being. He felt its weight in the heavy, silent air, in the incessant creaks of the old building, in the chilling whispers that followed him through the desolate hallways. He was trapped, consumed by the dark secrets of Havenwood, its legacies slowly unraveling his sanity and threatening to swallow him whole. The town, once a place of forgotten memories, had become a prison, its secrets a web from which there seemed no escape. The whispers in the walls were not simply warnings, they were invitations to a realm of unspeakable horror. A realm Alex was steadily, terrifyingly falling into. Sleep offered no respite, only a descent into a swirling vortex of fragmented memories and nightmarish visions. The dreams weren't coherent narratives. They were shards of experience, splintered images, and unsettling soundscapes that coalesced into a chaotic tapestry of fear. Faces swam before his eyes, indistinct features dissolving into shadows, only to reform into fleeting glimpses of terrified children, their eyes wide with a silent scream. He saw them running, their small forms swallowed by the gloom of the school's overgrown grounds, their laughter morphing into chilling whispers. These weren't just dreams. They felt like echoes from a life half-remembered, a past he desperately tried to grasp, only to find it slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. One dream, recurring with unsettling frequency, featured a towering oak tree, its gnarled branches clawing at the bruised twilight sky. Beneath it, he was a child, no older than 7, his small hand clutched in that of a woman whose face remained stubbornly obscured by shadows. The woman's voice, a faint melody carried on the wind, seemed both familiar and alien, a whisper on the edge of understanding. They were fleeing something. He sensed it keenly, a nameless terror that spurred them onward through the deepening shadows. He could almost smell the damp earth, the chilling scent of decaying leaves, the overwhelming sense of dread that clung to the air. But the details remained elusive, like phantom limbs, tantalizingly close, yet perpetually out of reach. Another dream depicted the school itself, but not as it stood now, decaying and desolate. Instead, it was vibrant, bustling with the laughter of children, a place of vibrant life and light. The classrooms were filled with warmth, not the chilling emptiness he now knew so well. But amidst this illusion of normalcy, a disquieting undercurrent ran. He saw flashes of a shadowed figure lurking in the corridors, a presence that cast a long, malevolent shadow over the joyous scenes. The children seemed oblivious, their laughter somehow more chilling than terrifying, their joyous sounds a macabre soundtrack to his growing unease. This dream always ended abruptly, dissolving into a cacophony of screams and the shattering sound of glass. He woke up drenched in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, the echoes of the screams lingering in his ears. The line between dreams and waking life blurred further. He'd find himself staring blankly at a wall, the remnants of a dream clinging to his mind, the feeling of unseen eyes watching him lingering in the silent spaces. He'd catch glimpses of movement in his peripheral vision. A shadow darting across the floor, a fleeting image of a child's face peering from a darkened corner. These moments were fleeting, disappearing as quickly as they appeared, leaving him feeling disconcerted and unsure of what was real and what was a figment of his increasingly agitated mind. The town's history, once an abstract puzzle, now felt intimately intertwined with his own fractured memories. The school, the missing children, the town's cryptic warnings, they were all connected threads in a tapestry of forgotten trauma, a hidden past that was gradually revealing itself in his nightmares. He began to suspect that the whispers in the walls weren't just emanating from the building. They were echoes from his own subconscious, fragments of a buried past slowly surfacing, threatening to consume him. One morning, while sifting through a dusty box of old photographs, a picture caught his eye. It depicted a younger Alex, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. The woman was wearing a familiar-looking dress, a style reminiscent of photographs he'd seen in the school archives. He recognized the location in the background, the very oak tree from his recurring dream. The memory, however, was absent. The photograph was a tangible connection to a past he couldn't recall, a jarring reminder of the chasm of forgotten years. The photo ignited something within him, a spark of recognition buried deep within the murky depths of his subconscious. It felt as though a veil was being lifted, revealing a fragmented landscape of forgotten memories. The next few days were a blur of frantic searching, a desperate attempt to unearth the lost pieces of his past. He pored over old newspaper clippings, school records, anything that might shed light on the missing children and the town's shrouded history. The more he discovered, the more he realized the sheer depth of the town's collective amnesia. It was as if Havenwood itself was conspiring to conceal its dark secrets, protecting its painful past from those who dared to delve too deeply into its murky depths. He found mentions of missing children in the local paper, their photos grainy and faded, each one a haunting reminder of the town's hidden tragedy. He read stories of unexplained disappearances, whispers of strange happenings within the school, accounts dismissed as folklore, dismissed as the product of a small town's fertile imagination. But the cumulative effect was undeniable, painting a chilling picture of a town riddled with secrets and shadowed by a history of unspeakable horrors. The more he learned, the more the pieces of his own fractured memory began to fit together, revealing a terrifying image of his own past deeply entwined with the town's dark legacy. He started having flashbacks, vivid and terrifying, though often disjointed and confusing. One such flashback showed him as a young boy, hiding under the oak tree, watching in terror as a shadowy figure led a small girl away from the school grounds, her terrified cries fading into the distance. The figure's face remained obscured, but the sense of dread, the child's desperate cries, were vivid and inescapable, etching themselves into his memory with brutal clarity. The flashback ended abruptly, leaving him gasping for breath. The chilling image of the disappearing girl burned into his mind. Another flashback involved a classroom, dimly lit, the smell of chalk dust heavy in the air. He was huddled in a corner, clutching a tattered teddy bear, listening to the muffled sounds of a struggle. Fear gripped him, a primal terror that left him trembling. He saw a fleeting image of a woman, her face contorted in fear, before the memory dissolved into darkness. These fragmented memories were like puzzle pieces, scattered and incomplete, but hinting at a terrifying reality that was slowly but relentlessly piecing itself together. The dreams continued, each one more disturbing than the last, each fragment adding another layer to the chilling picture of Havenwood's dark history. He dreamt of shadowy figures moving through the school's corridors, their movements silent and menacing. He saw children trapped in a nightmarish version of the school, their faces contorted in silent screams, their laughter twisted into desperate pleas. The boundaries between dream and reality became increasingly porous, the lines blurring, until he couldn't tell where one began and the other ended. His waking moments were consumed by a growing sense of unease, a feeling that he was being watched, that something, or someone, was close by, lurking just outside his perception. The whispers in the walls intensified, their sounds becoming clearer, more defined. He could almost make out words, fragmented phrases that alluded to tragedy, to loss, to secrets buried deep within the town's collective unconscious. The whispers were no longer just sounds. They were voices, a chorus of unseen entities communicating through the very fabric of the decaying school. The school itself had become an extension of his fractured memory, its walls breathing the secrets of his past, pulling him further and further into the abyss of its dark history. The revelation of these memories, painful and horrifying as they were, brought with it a terrifying clarity. He wasn't just restoring a derelict school. He was unearthing his own buried past, a past inextricably linked to the town's darkest secrets, a past that threatened to consume him. The whispers were not just warnings, they were an invitation to a journey into the heart of darkness, a journey from which there might be no return. The weight of Havenwood settled upon him like a shroud. It wasn't just the decaying school, the crumbling facades of the old houses, or the oppressive silence that hung heavy in the air. It was the people, their averted gazes and hushed whispers, that truly amplified the growing sense of unease. They weren't openly hostile, not exactly. More like evasive. Their eyes flickered away when he met their gaze, their smiles strained and brief, their conversations abruptly stilled when he approached. He tried to engage them, to ask about the school, about the missing children, about anything that might offer a clue, a flicker of understanding. But their responses were carefully guarded, their words carefully chosen, deflecting his questions with polite but firm evasiveness. He'd get a mumbled, "It's best left forgotten," or a strained, "It's just an old wives' tale," or the most common response, an uncomfortable silence that stretched, thick and suffocating, until he felt compelled to retreat. Mrs. Gable, the owner of the only general store in town, initially seemed friendly enough, offering him a cup of lukewarm coffee and a slice of stale apple pie. But as he tried to broach the subject of the school's history, her smile vanished. Her eyes, usually twinkling with a mischievous glint, became cold and distant. Her hands, gnarled and knotted with age, tightened around her mug. "Some things," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "are better left undisturbed." Then, she abruptly turned her back and resumed arranging cans of peaches on the shelf, her silence a more potent warning than any words. Even the children, usually so quick to engage with strangers, seemed to instinctively avoid him. They would scurry away from his presence, their eyes wide and filled with a strange mixture of fear and fascination. He would catch glimpses of them huddled together, whispering, their small faces illuminated by the flickering gaslights, their hushed tones a chilling echo of the adults' veiled warnings. He spent days poring over microfilmed copies of the Havenwood Gazette, searching for clues. He found sporadic mentions of missing children, a girl vanishing from the town square, a boy disappearing from the woods behind the school, incidents that had been dismissed as runaways or accidents. The reporting was consistently cursory, lacking details, the articles devoid of any sense of urgency or real investigation. It was as if the town itself had collectively decided to erase these incidents from its memory, to sweep them under the rug of oblivion. The more he read, the more unsettling the pattern became. The disappearances clustered around specific years, around certain dates that seemed to carry a sinister resonance. One evening, walking past the old graveyard, he saw a group of townsfolk gathered near a freshly dug grave. They were dressed in somber black, their faces grim and impassive. Their hushed conversation was unintelligible from a distance, but the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken grief and a palpable sense of dread. A sense of unspoken guilt hung in the air thicker than the evening mist. The air seemed to crackle with unseen tension as he watched from a distance. He didn't dare approach. He felt as though he was intruding on a ritual, a clandestine ceremony that hinted at something deeply disturbing, something buried deep within the heart of Havenwood. The school itself seemed to amplify the growing sense of unease. The silence within its walls was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the mournful sigh of the wind whistling through the broken windows. The shadows in the corridors seemed to lengthen, to take on a life of their own, and he began to feel as if he wasn't alone, that he was being watched, observed by unseen eyes lurking in the darkness. The whispers, faint at first, grew louder, more insistent, seemed to emanate from the very structure of the building, a chorus of unseen voices recounting a forgotten tragedy. His dreams, too, intensified. The images were becoming clearer, more coherent, weaving together the fragments of his memory into a terrifying narrative. He saw himself, as a child, running through the woods, his small hand clasped in that of a woman who was no longer shadowy, but vividly recognizable, her face etched with the desperate fear mirrored in his own childish eyes. They were fleeing, running for their lives, pursued by a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence a palpable evil that seemed to ooze from the very earth itself. He saw the woman's face, her eyes pleading, her mouth forming a word, a name, that was lost to the chaos of the dream's abrupt ending. He woke with a gasp, his heart pounding, the echoes of the dream still clinging to his mind. He sat up, his sweat-soaked sheets clinging to his skin, the cold morning air doing little to soothe the chill that had settled deep in his bones. The rising sun cast long, skeletal shadows across his room, the familiar objects transformed into grotesque parodies, their edges blurred and indistinct in the half-light. The familiar comfort of his surroundings was gone, replaced by an acute sense of vulnerability, the disquieting feeling of being observed. The more he dug, the more he uncovered, the more the town's silence seemed to tighten around him, a suffocating pressure that threatened to crush him. He was caught in a web, a spider's silk spun from secrets, lies, and a deep-rooted collective amnesia. The town wasn't just concealing its history. It was actively trying to prevent him from uncovering its dark past, its secrets intimately interwoven with his own trauma, his own forgotten memories. He felt a growing certainty that this wasn't just a mystery to be solved. It was a battle, a fight against a collective force determined to keep its secrets buried. The whispers were no longer just sounds, but a chorus of voices, warnings that echoed his own deep-seated fears, a palpable warning of the dangerous path he was treading, a path that led straight into the heart of Havenwood's darkness, a darkness that seemed intent on consuming him. Chapter 2. The 1973 incident, the Havenwood Public Library, was a mausoleum of dusty tomes and forgotten stories. The air hung thick with the scent of aged paper and mildew, a fitting atmosphere for the task at hand. Alex, armed with a magnifying glass and a worn notepad, meticulously sifted through microfilmed copies of the Havenwood Gazette, his search focused on the year 1973. He had a hunch, a gut feeling fueled by his increasingly vivid nightmares and the town's unnerving reticence, that the key to unlocking Havenwood's secrets lay buried within that year. The initial search yielded little. Sporadic mentions of minor incidents, a lost dog, a minor traffic accident, a town bake sale, filled the pages, their mundane details a stark contrast to the growing unease that had become his constant companion. He pored over every word, every photograph, his eyes straining, his patience wearing thin. Days bled into nights, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the gnawing suspicion that he was chasing a ghost. Then, tucked away on a seemingly insignificant page, amidst advertisements for local businesses and society events, he found it. A brief, almost apologetic, announcement. Tragic accident at Havenwood Elementary School. The article was remarkably terse, offering little more than a statement of the incident and the vague mention of multiple injuries, before abruptly shifting to a report on the upcoming town fair. There was no mention of fatalities, no description of the cause of the accident, no details whatsoever. Just a jarring, incongruous note in an otherwise unremarkable chronicle of daily life. Alex felt a jolt, a physical reaction to the sparse details. The brevity of the announcement was itself suspicious, a blatant attempt to bury a story. It was as if the town had conspired to erase this event from its collective memory, to sweep it under a rug woven from silence and deceit. He scanned the following week's editions, expecting further reports, follow-up stories. There were none. The incident vanished as quickly as it had appeared, as if it had never happened at all. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just a minor accident. It was a deliberate act of obfuscation. The town was hiding something, and that something was intimately connected to his own fragmented memories, his own recurring nightmares. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of determination. He had to know more. He left the library, the chill of the autumn air doing little to quell the fire that burned within him. He drove to the county courthouse, hoping to find official records, police reports, anything that might shed light on the 1973 incident. The county clerk, a gaunt woman with tired eyes and a perpetually weary expression, seemed unsurprised by his request. She led him to a dusty archive room, the air thick with the smell of mold and decay. He found the file, a thick manila folder stamped with the date, October 26, 1973. The records were even more frustrating than the newspaper clipping. The police report was minimal, offering a summary so vague it was almost meaningless. It described an incident at the school, a brief flurry of activity involving first responders, and a swift conclusion with no charges filed and no suspects identified. The language was clinical, devoid of emotion, lacking any descriptive detail. It was as if the officer writing the report had intentionally avoided documenting the specifics, carefully avoiding any potentially incriminating information. Medical records were equally elusive. The files mentioned injuries to multiple children, but offered no specific details, describing them only as non-life-threatening. The descriptions of the injuries were vague, leaving the exact nature of the trauma shrouded in uncertainty. There were no x-rays, no photographs, no detailed examination reports. It was as though a deliberate effort had been made to erase any concrete evidence of what transpired within the school that day. One document, however, stood out, a handwritten note tucked into the back of the file. It was a fragment of a conversation, seemingly a transcription of a phone call between the town mayor at the time and a state investigator. The conversation was disjointed, fragmented, peppered with omissions and suggestive subtext. The mayor, whose name was Thomas Blackwood, repeatedly emphasized the need to keep it quiet, to protect the town's reputation. The state investigator seemed hesitant, but ultimately conceded, apparently agreeing to a cover-up. The note ended abruptly mid-sentence, with a scribbled postscript. This goes no further. The chilling implication was clear. The 1973 incident wasn't an accident. It was a cover-up. And someone in Havenwood, someone powerful enough to manipulate both local and state authorities, wanted to keep the truth buried. Alex felt a growing sense of dread, a certainty that he was digging deeper than he had ever intended, unearthing something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He felt the weight of Havenwood's collective amnesia pressing down on him, a burden shared by the town's residents, a burden that threatened to consume him entirely. He spent the rest of the day reviewing the meager evidence, piecing together the scant information, searching for a pattern, a clue, anything that might illuminate the darkness shrouding this decades-old mystery. The more he delved into the records, the more questions arose, the more he realized the sheer scope of the conspiracy. This wasn't just a single act of concealment. It was a meticulously planned operation, a deliberate attempt to erase a traumatic event from the historical record, a collective amnesia carefully constructed and maintained for over half a century. As darkness fell, Alex found himself back at the old school, its shadowy outline barely visible in the gathering gloom. The whispers, once faint and almost imperceptible, were now clearer, more insistent, swirling around him like a phantom chorus. He felt the presence of something unseen, something malevolent, watching him, waiting. The fragments of his own memory, the glimpses of his childhood trauma, were becoming clearer. He could almost see the figure in his dreams, the cloaked figure that pursued him, and the woman whose face he could now partially recognize, her fear mirrored in his own childhood eyes. The 1973 incident was not just a historical mystery. It was a key, a doorway that opened onto his own past, his own buried trauma. He was not just investigating a tragedy, he was confronting it, revisiting a memory he had spent his entire life trying to repress. And in doing so, he was awakening a terrifying truth, a truth that the town of Havenwood had conspired to bury deep beneath layers of silence and deceit, a truth that threatened to consume him entirely. The town's secrets were inextricably linked to his own, a chilling realization that sent a shiver down his spine. He was no longer just an outsider investigating a mystery. He was an active participant in its unfolding, a pawn in a game far older and far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The silence of Havenwood was no longer just unsettling. It was a deafening roar, a desperate attempt to suffocate the truth, a truth he was determined to unearth, even if it meant facing the darkness that awaited. The county courthouse offered little solace. Its sterile hallways seemed to echo with the stifled cries of the past. The meager records provided only a skeletal framework, the missing flesh and blood replaced by chilling omissions. But it was in the courthouse's dimly lit basement, amidst stacks of forgotten files, that Alex discovered a new line of inquiry. A seemingly insignificant ledger, its cover worn and faded, listed the names of Havenwood Elementary students from 1973. As he scanned the list, a cold dread began to grip him. He noticed a pattern, a chilling correlation between the names carved into the floorboards of the old school and the names on this aged ledger. 5 names, 5 children. 5 names etched into the school's floor, their silent screams resonating across the decades. He cross-referenced the list with the local newspaper archives, searching for any mention of these children after the accident at the school. The results were unsettling. They were all listed as missing after October 26, 1973. The newspaper reports, like the official records, were brief, almost dismissive, offering no details, no clues, only a void where information should have been. Their disappearances, just like the accident itself, had been swept under the rug of collective amnesia. Sarah Jenkins, a bright-eyed girl with a penchant for storytelling. Thomas Miller, a quiet boy with a fascination for insects. Emily Carter, a gifted artist. Daniel Hayes, a cheerful athlete. And little Lily Evans, known for her infectious laughter. Their lives, their futures, stolen in the shadow of the 1973 incident. Alex felt a surge of anger, a burning injustice, as he stared at the names. These weren't just missing persons. They were victims, casualties of a conspiracy so vast it encompassed the entire town. The missing children became the focal point of his investigation. He spent weeks poring over census records, yearbooks, school photographs, anything that might offer a glimpse into their lives, their personalities, their last known moments. He spoke to elderly residents, his questions met with hesitant replies, evasive answers, and uncomfortable silences. The town's collective amnesia had taken root, a deep-seated refusal to acknowledge the past, to confront the darkness that lurked beneath the veneer of idyllic small-town life. Some offered fragmented memories, whispers of unusual activity around the school in the fall of '73, rumors of strange vehicles seen in the vicinity, hushed conversations overheard in darkened corners. But whenever he pressed for specifics, the memories would fade, the details would evaporate, leaving him with nothing but tantalizing snippets of information, mere shadows of the truth. He sensed a profound fear lurking beneath the surface of their reticence, a fear so deep, so ingrained, it prevented them from speaking freely. The town's collective memory was a fractured mirror, reflecting only a distorted version of the truth. The accident at the elementary school, the subsequent disappearances. These weren't isolated incidents. They were interconnected pieces of a larger, more terrifying puzzle. Alex realized that the names carved into the floorboards weren't random. They were a morbid testament to the town's dark history, a haunting epitaph for the missing children. The more Alex learned, the darker the story became. He discovered accounts of unsettling occurrences leading up to the accident, whispered tales of strange rituals performed in the woods surrounding Heavenwood, ominous symbols found near the school, reports of unusual sightings in the night. He found an old map tucked away in the back of a forgotten drawer in a library. A map of Havenwood with several locations marked by peculiar symbols, locations that correlated with the areas where the missing children were last seen. The symbols were haunting, a blend of arcane geometry and unsettling iconography that sent a shiver down his spine. He recognized some of them from his own fragmented memories, the same symbols that appeared in his nightmares, the same symbols that the cloaked figure in his dreams had used. The connection between his past and Havenwood's secrets was solidifying. The town's darkness was seeping into him, threatening to overwhelm him with its chilling embrace. He felt a growing certainty that the accident was no accident at all. It was a carefully orchestrated event, a diversionary tactic used to cover up something far more sinister. The disappearances were not random acts of violence. They were the culmination of a long-standing, meticulously planned operation. The town's silence, its refusal to confront the past, was not simply amnesia, it was complicity. The residents of Havenwood were not victims. They were participants in a conspiracy that spanned generations. As Alex delved deeper, the gothic atmosphere of Havenwood intensified. The town itself seemed to breathe a sinister aura, the shadows lengthening, the whispers growing louder. He found himself drawn to the old Blackwood Manor, a decaying mansion perched on a hill overlooking the town, its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. Local lore whispered that the Blackwoods, the town's founding family, were linked to dark practices, rituals shrouded in secrecy and steeped in the occult. The manor, shrouded in mist and decay, became the epicenter of his nightmares. He would dream of the cloaked figure, its face obscured by shadows, leading a procession of children into the Blackwood Manor, their terrified faces illuminated by flickering candlelight. In his dreams, he could see himself as a child, hidden among the missing children, his own fear mirroring theirs. The nightmares were becoming increasingly vivid, the line between reality and dream blurring, the boundaries of his own memory dissolving. His investigation began to take on a frantic urgency. He knew he was treading on dangerous ground. He felt the weight of Havenwood's secrets pressing down on him, threatening to consume him. The silence of the town was no longer merely unsettling. It was a palpable presence, a menacing force trying to silence him, to bury the truth before it saw the light of day. He was no longer merely investigating a mystery. He was confronting a monster, a conspiracy that was determined to protect its secrets at any cost. He began to fear that he might be next. The town wasn't just hiding its past, it was actively hunting him, attempting to erase him, just like it had done with the missing children. He was now a pawn in a deadly game, a game he was starting to lose. The more Alex unearthed, the more he realized the depth of the deception. The missing children weren't just victims. They were sacrifices, pawns in a ritualistic horror far beyond his comprehension. The accident at the school, the subsequent disappearances, the ominous symbols, the hushed conversations, the collective amnesia, it all pointed to a single terrifying conclusion. Havenwood was not a haven, it was a hell, and he was trapped inside. The chilling revelation threatened to overwhelm him, to consume him in the darkness that the town had so diligently concealed for decades. His fight to uncover the truth had become a desperate fight for survival. The line between investigator and victim was rapidly dissolving, and the shadows were closing in. The gnawing unease that had settled over Alex intensified as he explored the neglected corners of Havenwood Elementary. His investigation, fueled by a growing sense of dread, had led him to a place far beyond the dusty archives and hushed whispers of the town's elders. He discovered a discrepancy, a missing section on the school's blueprints, suggesting the existence of a previously undocumented room tucked away somewhere within the labyrinthine structure. Days blended into nights as Alex meticulously searched, tracing forgotten hallways, peering into dusty storage closets, and feeling the chill of the abandoned school's history brush against his skin. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay and the whisper of forgotten voices. The silence was a suffocating blanket, broken only by the occasional creak of the aging floorboards under his feet, a soundtrack to his growing obsession. Finally, behind a loose panel in the basement, hidden behind decades of accumulated dust and debris, he found it. A small, unassuming door, almost swallowed by the shadows. The door, made of heavy oak, was sealed shut with a rusted lock. He worked tirelessly, using the tools from his car, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation and fear. The lock finally gave way with a groan that echoed through the stillness of the basement, releasing a wave of stale, musty air, heavy with the scent of aged paper and forgotten memories. He pushed the door open, and a wave of issy air rushed out, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender and something else, something indefinably old and unsettling. The room was small, barely larger than a walk-in closet, crammed with forgotten relics of the past. A collection of chipped teacups, a stack of yellowed photographs, and several worn leather-bound books. But the most striking feature was a large wooden trunk, its brass clasps tarnished with age, sitting in the center of the room. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, nestled among faded linens and moth-eaten clothing, was a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. The name Eleanor Vance was embossed in elegant script on the cover. Eleanor Vance. The name sparked a flicker of recognition. He'd seen it mentioned briefly in a local history book. A teacher who had worked at Havenwood Elementary in 1973, the year of the accident. The journal seemed to be her personal diary, its pages filled with a spidery handwriting that spoke of a woman wrestling with inner turmoil and mounting anxieties. He carefully opened the journal, its pages rustling like dried leaves. The first entries described the idyllic life of a young teacher in a small, close-knit community. She spoke of her students, their laughter and their dreams, painting a vibrant picture of the school before the incident. But as the entries progressed, a palpable shift occurred. The optimistic tone gave way to a mounting sense of unease, of impending doom. The entries from October 1973 were particularly chilling. They spoke of strange occurrences, ominous whispers among the students, unusual symbols appearing on the school grounds, and a growing sense of dread that seemed to permeate the entire town. Eleanor described unsettling nighttime activities in the woods surrounding Havenwood, strange rituals that left her deeply disturbed. She mentioned a growing unease amongst her colleagues, a sense of something dark and ominous hanging in the air. Her descriptions of the children's behavior were equally unsettling. She wrote of Sarah Jenkins' increasingly vivid nightmares, Thomas Miller's sudden obsession with the woods, Emily Carter's disturbing artwork, Daniel Hayes' strange nocturnal wanderings, and little Lily Evans' unsettling silences. It seemed that the children, like their teacher, were sensing the ominous presence that had begun to consume Havenwood. However, Eleanor's journal never explicitly detailed the events of October 26th, the day of the accident. Instead, the entries abruptly stopped, leaving a gaping void in the narrative. The final entry was a frantic scrawl, filled with fear and a sense of impending doom, ending mid-sentence. The implication was clear. Something terrible had happened to her, something that abruptly cut short her life and left the events of that dreadful day shrouded in mystery. Alex realized the journal was not a complete account. It was a fragment, a shattered piece of a much larger puzzle. It offered tantalizing glimpses into the darkness that had enveloped Havenwood in 1973, but it did not provide the answers. Instead, it raised more questions, casting even deeper shadows over the already chilling mystery. He closed the journal, his mind reeling from the information it had revealed. The cryptic entries left him with a disturbing sense of incompleteness, a chilling realization that Eleanor Vance had known more than she had written, that she had been silenced before she could reveal the entire truth. As he examined the rest of the trunk's contents, he found a faded photograph. It showed a group of teachers, smiling stiffly, their faces radiating a forced cheerfulness that seemed at odds with the shadowed eyes and strained smiles. Eleanor Vance was in the center of the photograph, her hand resting on the shoulder of a man with a stern expression and unsettlingly piercing eyes. Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen that face somewhere before, perhaps in one of his nightmarish visions. Deep within the trunk's recesses, amidst layers of old fabrics and forgotten trinkets, Alex found a small, tarnished silver locket. Inside, a faded photograph of a young woman, beautiful but with an expression of deep sadness in her eyes, stared back at him. Her face was partially obscured, but he sensed a familiar sadness emanating from the picture. The back of the locket bore an inscription, "To Eleanor, with undying love, Elias." The name Elias, like the face in the photograph, felt unnervingly familiar. The discovery of the locket reignited the unease that had been simmering within him since the start of his investigation. He felt a sense of impending doom, a premonition that he was getting closer to a truth that was both terrifying and deeply personal. He felt a growing certainty that he was not just piecing together a historical mystery. He was uncovering a hidden truth intricately woven into the fabric of his own life. The shadows of Havenwood were no longer confined to the town itself. They were reaching out, threatening to engulf him in their darkness. The search for the truth was no longer just an intellectual pursuit. It had become a fight for survival. The more he dug, the more he felt that the town wasn't just hiding his past. It was actively hunting him, attempting to erase him, just like it had done with the missing children. He was a pawn in a deadly game, and the stakes were far higher than he had ever imagined. The nightmarish visions of the cloaked figure intensified, the symbols haunting his dreams becoming increasingly clear, linking his own fragmented memories to the secrets buried within Havenwood. Leaving the school, Alex felt the weight of the town's secrets pressing down on him. He was no longer merely an investigator. He had become a part of the story, a player in a game of deception, and he was losing. The journal, the photograph, the locket, they were all pieces of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that could lead to his own destruction. As he drove away from the school, leaving the suffocating silence behind, he knew his investigation had just entered its most dangerous phase. The town was not only hiding its dark past, it was hunting him. And he didn't know if he would survive the hunt. The growing darkness surrounding him was more palpable than ever, mirroring the deepening shadows within his own memories. The line between investigator and victim was blurring, and the terrifying truth seemed just within reach, promising a horrifying revelation that would change his life forever. The drive home was a blur, the familiar landscape of Havenwood now warped and sinister in his mind's eye. Each tree seemed to watch him, its branches clawing at the darkening sky like skeletal fingers. The quiet hum of his engine felt insignificant against the growing symphony of dread within him. He'd felt watched since leaving the school, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a feeling that unseen eyes were following his every move. That night, sleep evaded him. The chilling images from Eleanor Vance's journal replayed in his mind. The children's haunted faces, the unsettling symbols etched into the school's walls, and the recurring image of the cloaked figure from his childhood nightmares. The symbols, once vague and fleeting, were now sharp and defined in his memory, intertwining with his own fragmented recollections. He saw flashes of shadowy figures, whispers carried on the wind, and the pervasive feeling of an unseen presence, a chilling anticipation that hung heavy in the air. The next morning, a subtle change had fallen over Havenwood. The welcoming smiles of the previous days had vanished, replaced by wary glances and hushed whispers. He noticed cars slowing as he walked down Main Street, their occupants staring at him with a mixture of suspicion and something darker, something akin to open hostility. At the diner, his usual coffee was lukewarm, and the waitress, normally friendly, served him with a curtness that felt almost menacing. The climax of his ordeal, his confrontation with the truth, was drawing near. The escalating threats and psychological manifestations served only to push him further into the heart of Havenwood's dark history, pushing him closer to a truth that was both terrifying and deeply personal. As the shadows closed in, Alex knew he was fighting not just for his life, but for his sanity, his memories, and his very identity. The game had escalated, the hunt was on, and the hunter was Havenwood itself. The town was ready to unleash its full fury upon him. The chipped paint of the school's abandoned classroom seemed to mock him. Each peel and flake felt like a whispered accusation, a silent testament to the horrors he was unearthing. The air hung heavy with the scent of dust and decay, a cloying sweetness that fought with the metallic tang of fear clinging to the back of his throat. He traced the unsettling symbols etched into the weathered wood of the desks, their meaning still elusive, yet undeniably linked to the nightmares that now plagued his every waking moment. His hands trembled as he ran his fingers over the crude carvings, feeling the rough texture beneath his fingertips. The symbols were everywhere, scratched into the walls, etched onto the window panes, even faintly visible on the worn floorboards. They were a visual echo of the chilling images that haunted his sleep, a constant reminder of the insidious darkness that had ensnared him. He felt a growing disconnect between his memories and the reality of his situation. Were these visions mere hallucinations, products of his own fractured psyche, fueled by the relentless pressure and fear? Or were they glimpses into a truth too terrible to bear, fragments of a past he had somehow repressed, a past inextricably linked to this forsaken school and the chilling secrets it held? Doubt gnawed at him, a relentless parasite feeding on his already fraying sanity. The line between reality and delusion blurred, each waking moment a struggle to discern fact from fiction. The familiar faces of Havenwood residents twisted into grotesque parodies in his mind's eye, their whispers turning into chilling threats. He saw the cloaked figure lurking in the shadows of his apartment, its presence a constant, suffocating weight. He started to question his own perceptions, his own memories, his own identity. Was he losing his mind? His actions became increasingly erratic, a desperate attempt to maintain a grip on his crumbling reality. He spent sleepless nights poring over Eleanor Vance's journal, searching for answers that seemed to slip further from his grasp with each passing hour. He wandered the deserted streets of Havenwood, a wraith in the pale moonlight, his senses hyper-acute, his nerves stretched taut as a violin string. He jumped at shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs, his breath coming in ragged gasps. During the day, he'd force himself to function, to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the underlying anxiety was a constant thrumming beneath the surface. He found himself talking aloud, muttering fragments of the journal, rehearsing the symbols he'd discovered, as if repeating them would somehow unlock their meaning, dispel the growing unease that consumed him. One afternoon, while searching through the school's archives, he stumbled upon a dusty box containing old photographs. He recognized several of the children from Eleanor Vance's journal, their young faces frozen in time, their smiles unsettlingly vacant. As he examined one picture more closely, he felt a sickening sense of familiarity with a man standing at the edge of the frame. The man was tall and gaunt, with dark, brooding eyes, his face partially obscured by shadow. A chill shot through him. The man's eyes held a chilling recognition, an echo of the same unnerving connection he'd felt with the mysterious figure from his nightmares. It was a connection he couldn't explain, couldn't ignore. The image resonated with a deep, primal fear, a gut-wrenching certainty that this man was somehow at the heart of his troubles, a key to the secrets buried beneath Havenwood's placid surface. Days bled into weeks, weeks into a nightmarish cycle of investigation and escalating terror. The town's hostility intensified, the subtle threats escalating into overt acts of aggression. Rocks continued to crash through his windows, his car tires were repeatedly slashed, and threatening notes were slipped under his door. The whispers followed him everywhere, insidious and persistent, a chorus of condemnation that echoed his own growing self-doubt. His sleep was stolen, replaced by a torrent of nightmarish visions. The children's laughter morphed into agonizing screams, the comforting scent of lavender twisted into a suffocating odor of decay, and the cloaked figure continued its relentless pursuit, its shadowy form growing more defined, more menacing with each passing dream. The psychological toll was devastating. He began to question the reality of his own memories, unable to distinguish between what he truly experienced and what was a product of his fractured mind. He lost track of time, days merging into a single, unbroken nightmare. His reflection in the mirror seemed alien, his eyes dark and haunted, his face etched with a weariness that seemed to transcend mere exhaustion. He attempted to confide in Sheriff Brody again, but the sheriff's warning grew more insistent, his words heavy with a threat he couldn't ignore. Brody alluded to a power within Havenwood, a collective will that protected its secrets with ruthless efficiency. He said that some wounds never healed, that some truths were better left buried. His words felt less like advice and more like a chilling prophecy, a declaration of the town's unyielding resolve to keep its secrets safe. Alex felt isolated, trapped in a web of fear and self-doubt, his sanity fraying at the edges. He was fighting not only against the unseen forces arrayed against him, but also against the insidious whispers of his own mind, the gnawing uncertainty that questioned the very foundation of his reality. The more he dug into the secrets of 1973, the more elusive the truth seemed to become, the more he felt the chilling certainty that Havenwood was determined to bury him with its secrets. The shadow of doubt was no longer a whisper. It was a suffocating shroud, threatening to consume him entirely. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the game was far from over. The hunt was relentless, and he was becoming increasingly unsure whether he was the hunter or the hunted. Chapter 3. Confronting the truth, the faded photograph felt brittle under his fingertips, the emulsion cracking like ancient parchment. It depicted a group of children, their smiles strained and unnatural, posed stiffly in front of a dilapidated building, the Havenwood Elementary School. He'd seen these children before, their faces haunting the margins of Eleanor Vance's journal, their laughter echoing in his nightmares. But it was the man lurking at the edge of the frame that truly stole his breath. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that burned with a cold, unsettling intelligence, he was the figure from his visions, the cloaked specter that stalked his dreams. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was a horrifying confirmation. A wave of nausea washed over him, the room tilting precariously. He recognized the man, not through conscious memory, but through a visceral, primal sense of dread that burrowed deep into his bones. It was a recognition that transcended time, a chilling echo resonating from the depths of his subconscious. The man's face was mostly obscured by shadow, but the intensity in his eyes, the cruel glint of something dark and malevolent, was unmistakable. He clutched the photograph tighter, his knuckles white, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Suddenly, a fragmented memory surfaced, a fleeting glimpse from a long-buried past. He saw himself, a small boy, huddled in the shadows of the schoolyard, watching the man through the rain-streaked window. The image was blurry, fragmented, yet undeniably real. He felt the cold dampness of the ground against his cheek, the tremor in his small hands. He heard the children's laughter, but it was twisted, distorted, tinged with a terrifying undercurrent of fear. Then the memory shifted. He saw the man's hands, long and bony, reaching for one of the children, his touch cruel and predatory. A scream tore through the air, swallowed by the echoing silence of the night. The image dissolved, leaving him gasping for air, the cold sweat clinging to his skin. He was back in the present, the dusty photograph clutched in his trembling hands, the chilling reality sinking in. The man in the picture wasn't just a figment of his imagination. He was the key to Havenwood's dark secrets, the architect of the horrors he'd been experiencing. He spent the next few days consumed by the photograph, poring over every detail, searching for any clue that might lead him closer to the truth. He scoured the school archives, the local library, even the dusty attics of Havenwood's oldest houses. He dug through newspaper clippings, yearbooks, census records, anything that might offer a glimpse into the man's identity, his past, his connection to the 1973 incident. The more he searched, the more fragmented and terrifying the truth became. He found newspaper clippings detailing a series of unsolved disappearances of children in Havenwood during the early 1970s. The descriptions were vague, the details scant, but they all mentioned the same unsettling pattern. The children vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a chilling sense of unease and unanswered questions. He found a faded police report mentioning a witness who described seeing a tall, gaunt man lurking near the school in the days leading up to the disappearances. The description matched the man in the photograph perfectly. Another fragment of memory surfaced, a chilling echo of a childhood nightmare. He was in the school, hidden under a desk, the floorboards cold and damp beneath him. He saw the children, their eyes wide with terror, their laughter replaced by desperate, silent pleas. The man was there, his shadow stretching across the floor, his movements swift and predatory. The memory was fragmented, disjointed, yet the terror it evoked was visceral and undeniably real. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, revealing a far more sinister reality than he could have imagined. The 1973 incident wasn't just a tragic accident. It was a meticulously planned series of events, orchestrated by the man in the photograph. The symbols he'd seen etched into the school's walls, the unsettling imagery in his nightmares, it was all connected, all part of a larger, horrifying truth that Havenwood was desperately trying to conceal. He understood now why Sheriff Brody was so resistant to his investigation. The town's collective amnesia wasn't just a psychological phenomenon. It was a deliberate act of collective self-preservation. They had buried their dark past, burying the truth along with it, protecting their collective consciousness from the unbearable weight of their shared guilt. He was an intruder, an unwelcome disruption to their carefully constructed facade of normalcy. The escalating threats, the escalating hostility, they weren't random acts of aggression. They were deliberate attempts to silence him, to bury him with the town's secrets. Days turned into weeks, the line between reality and nightmare blurring further. He found himself constantly replaying the fragmented memories, piecing together the scattered fragments of the past like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. The more he learned, the deeper he plunged into the abyss of Havenwood's dark history, the more he realized how much he had unknowingly repressed. The chilling weight of shared trauma settled upon him, a heavy cloak of fear and uncertainty. He was no longer just investigating a cold case. He was confronting the dark underbelly of his own past, a past that had been carefully buried, hidden beneath layers of repressed memories and self-deception. He was uncovering a truth so terrifying, so profound, that it threatened to shatter his sanity. He began to see the parallels between the events of 1973 and his own experiences, the unsettling echoes of shared trauma resonating through time. One night, driven by a desperate need for answers, he returned to the abandoned school. The moon cast long, eerie shadows across the grounds, the silence broken only by the rustling of the wind. He felt a strange sense of familiarity, a chilling déjà vu that sent shivers down his spine. He climbed through the broken window, the splintered wood grating against his skin. The smell of dust and decay hung heavy in the air, a sickeningly sweet reminder of the horrors he was about to uncover. He found a hidden room, a small, cramped space tucked away in the basement. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something acrid and metallic that made his stomach churn. In the center of the room, he found a worn wooden chest, its surface etched with the same unsettling symbols he'd seen throughout the school. He hesitated, his heart pounding, a cold dread gripping his soul. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that whatever lay inside that chest held the key to Havenwood's dark secrets, the horrifying truth that had been buried for decades. With trembling hands, he opened the chest. Inside, nestled amongst layers of faded fabric and yellowed paper, he found a collection of photographs, letters, and diaries. The photographs depicted the children from his nightmares, their faces frozen in moments of both innocent joy and unspeakable terror. The letters revealed a chilling correspondence between the man in the photograph and a group of adults, the details coded and disturbing, hinting at a ritualistic nature to the children's disappearances. The diaries recounted the man's descent into madness, his obsession with the occult, his twisted vision of a world cleansed through sacrifice. The diaries were written in a frantic, almost delirious script, filled with cryptic symbols and incoherent ramblings. And yet, scattered throughout the pages were snatches of lucidity, moments of terrifying clarity that reveal the man's chilling plans. He described the children as vessels, conduits to some ancient malevolent force, tools to be used in a dark ritual to unleash a power far beyond human comprehension. The man's words were a disturbing symphony of madness, hatred, and arcane knowledge. As he read, the fragmented memories began to coalesce, revealing a horrific tapestry of events, a twisted narrative that linked the past to the present, connecting the 1973 incident to his own repressed trauma. He realized that he had not only witnessed the horrors of 1973, he had been a participant, a silent witness to the atrocities committed by the man in the photograph. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, sending him reeling back against the cold, damp wall. The symbols, the nightmares, the visions, the escalating terror in Havenwood, it all made sense now. It was the shared trauma, the collective guilt, the desperate attempt to suppress the truth that fueled the town's collective amnesia. They were not just protecting their secrets. They were protecting themselves from the overwhelming psychological weight of what had happened. And he, Alex, was the key to unlocking that buried truth, a truth so horrifying that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of his reality and the sanity of Havenwood itself. The hunt was far from over. He was no longer just searching for answers. He was fighting for his life, for his sanity, and for the souls of those who had been lost in the darkness of Havenwood's past. The flickering gaslight cast long, dancing shadows across the walls of his rented room, mimicking the phantoms that now haunted his waking hours. The scent of wood smoke, usually comforting, now felt suffocating, a reminder of the countless nights he'd spent huddled over the chilling contents of the wooden chest, the diary's frantic script blurring before his eyes. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams were a relentless replay of fragmented memories, a nightmarish kaleidoscope of childhood terror and adult dread. The faces of the children, their wide, terrified eyes, seemed to follow him, their silent pleas echoing in the vacant spaces of his mind. His body, once strong and resilient, was now racked with exhaustion. Dark circles ringed his eyes, the hollows of his cheeks deepening with each passing day. He existed in a perpetual state of low-grade fever, his appetite gone, his hands trembling constantly. The weight of Havenwood's secrets pressed down on him, crushing him beneath the sheer magnitude of the horror he had unearthed. He felt the chilling proximity of madness, the insidious creep of disintegration, as if his own sanity were slowly fraying at the edges, unraveling like a worn tapestry. The journal entries chronicled not just the events of 1973, but the man's disturbing descent into darkness, a descent fueled by obsession, paranoia, and an unsettling fascination with the occult. He spoke of rituals, of sacrifices, of summoning ancient, malevolent entities. The man's writing, a chaotic jumble of cryptic symbols and feverish pronouncements, revealed a mind consumed by a twisted vision of purification through destruction. The words leaped from the page, clawing at Alex, tearing at the seams of his already fractured psyche. He found himself replaying specific passages again and again, searching for clues, for meaning, for anything that might explain his own fragmented memories. He recognized details, images that echoed his own repressed recollections. The cold, Damp floorboards of the school, the smell of rain on dust, the chilling silence broken only by the terrified gasps of children. It was all too horribly familiar, a recurring nightmare disguised as reality. One entry, in particular, haunted him. It described a specific ritual, a culmination of the man's dark work, and a chillingly detailed account of a child. A child with a distinctive birthmark on his left shoulder, being used as a conduit to summon an entity from the abyss. Alex felt a nauseating surge of recognition. He had that birthmark. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, leaving him gasping for air, his body drenched in a cold sweat. He was not merely a witness. He had been a participant, a silent actor in a horrific tragedy. He had survived, but at what cost? The weight of this revelation threatened to shatter his already fragile mental state. The lines between his own memories and the journal's accounts blurred further, his sense of self fragmenting into a terrifying mosaic of the past and the present. He saw his own reflection in the distorted mirror of the man's madness, recognizing disturbing similarities in their pasts, their traumas, their shared obsession with Havenwood and its hidden evils. He was walking in the shadow of a monster, haunted by the specter of his own involvement. Days blurred into weeks. The constant barrage of information, the unending stream of horrifying revelations, began to take a toll on his physical health. He experienced vivid hallucinations, seeing the man's gaunt face lurking in the corners of his vision, hearing the children's desperate whispers in the silence of his room. He lost his appetite, his sleep, his sense of grounding in reality. The world around him became warped and distorted, a surreal landscape that mirrored the chaos within his mind. Sheriff Brody's veiled threats, once dismissed as local intimidation, now took on a chilling new meaning. The sheriff was not just protecting the town's secrets. He was protecting something far more sinister, something that connected to Alex's own past, to his own repressed memories. The veiled warnings, the menacing glances, the subtle acts of harassment, it was as if the entire town was colluding to keep him silent, to bury him along with their darkest secrets. The fear he felt was not just for his life, but for his sanity. He began to question his own perception of reality, his memory. He felt a disturbing sense of being unmoored, adrift in a sea of fragmented memories and terrifying hallucinations. He clutched at the tangible remnants of the past, the photographs, the letters, the diary, seeking some grounding, some concrete anchor in the swirling vortex of his collapsing reality. But the more he clung to these artifacts, the deeper he seemed to sink into the darkness. He tried to seek help, to confide in someone, but his words came out fragmented, disjointed, echoing the chaos within his mind. He found himself unable to articulate the sheer horror he had uncovered, the weight of the past that crushed him beneath its unrelenting pressure. Those who listened, even those who had once offered a glimmer of understanding, began to distance themselves, their discomfort turning to fear, their concern to suspicion. He was alone, truly alone, trapped within the suffocating grip of Havenwood's collective amnesia, a prisoner of his own past. The pursuit of truth had transformed him into something broken, a hollow shell haunted by the memories of others, by the horrors he had witnessed, and by the terrifying, inescapable truth of his own involvement. The quest had become a self-destructive spiral, leading him closer to the brink of madness, and further into the suffocating grasp of Havenwood's darkest secrets. The weight of the past was not merely a burden. It was a sentence of solitary confinement within the labyrinth of his own fractured mind. The chilling reality of his situation settled upon him like a shroud. He wasn't just solving a cold case. He was excavating the buried trauma of an entire town, a trauma that had irrevocably altered the course of his own life. He had glimpsed into the abyss, and in doing so, he had become a part of it. The fight for his life, for his sanity, had become inextricably linked with the fate of Havenwood itself. A desperate struggle against a force far greater and far more ancient than he could have ever imagined. The darkness clung to him, a persistent shadow, a constant reminder of the horrifying truth that he alone carried, the weight of a past he could never fully escape. The hunt for answers had become a fight for survival, a race against the encroaching darkness that threatened to consume him and Havenwood completely. The shard of memory pierced through the fog of his amnesia like a jagged piece of ice. It wasn't a vivid scene, not a brightly lit tableau, but a sensation. The chilling dampness of earth on his bare skin, the acrid smell of wood smoke mingling with the metallic tang of blood. He was small, impossibly small, huddled in a space too dark to see, too silent to hear anything but the frantic thumping of his own heart. Then came the whispers, the chillingly familiar whispers, the voices of children, their terror laced with an unsettling undercurrent of something ancient and malevolent. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image, or rather, the feeling, clinging to him like a leech. The diary lay forgotten on the table, its cryptic warnings suddenly insignificant beside the raw, visceral horror that clawed its way to the surface of his consciousness. This wasn't just information from a journal. It was a fragment of his own past, a piece of a puzzle he never knew was missing. The connection to the diary, to the man's chilling accounts, became undeniable. The rituals, the sacrifices, the summoning of entities. These weren't just the ravings of a madman. They were echoes of his own suppressed experiences. He'd known, somehow, deep within the shadowed recesses of his mind, that Havenwood held a darkness tied to him, but he had never truly grasped its extent. Now, the truth was a tidal wave, crashing over him, threatening to drown him in its icy depths. He remembered the birthmark, a jagged constellation of crimson on his left shoulder, a mark he always attributed to a childhood accident. Now, it was a branding iron, searing its way into his identity, linking him to the diary's chilling account of the ritual, a conduit for unimaginable evil. He was not just a victim of Havenwood's secrets. He was a participant, a silent witness to horrors too terrible to comprehend. The realization chipped away at his already fragile sanity. Sleep became a battlefield where memories warred with hallucinations, the line between past and present dissolving into a chaotic blur. He saw himself in the journal's descriptions, the scared, bewildered child, the passive participant in unthinkable acts. He saw his own reflection in the eyes of the other children, their terror mirroring his own. His family. The comfortable facade of his upbringing crumbled, replaced by a gaping chasm of unspoken horrors. His parents, their serene smiles replaced by masks of fear and complicity. He saw his own childhood through a distorted lens, picking out subtle clues, unsettling patterns, the hushed conversations, the averted gazes, the way his father's eyes would sometimes hold a strange glint of something dark and terrifying. The memories came in fragments, fleeting glimpses of ritualistic dances in the moonlit woods, chilling chants resonating in the air, the scent of incense mixed with the metallic odor of blood. He was a spectator, yet also a participant, forced to play a part in a terrible drama beyond his comprehension. He remembered his own fear, his desperate efforts to bury it away, but not before it had deeply scared his soul. Each new memory unearthed a layer of betrayal, a new level of horror. His family, once a source of comfort and stability, were now the architects of his trauma, silent conspirators in a crime spanning generations. The weight of their silence, of their complicity, was heavier than any physical burden he'd ever known. The town itself seemed to conspire against him. Sheriff Brody's threats were no longer veiled. They were open, blatant, his gaze heavy with the weight of shared secrets, of a collective guilt that suffocated the very air he breathed. The townsfolk, once friendly neighbors, were now shadows, their eyes full of a chilling mixture of fear and something else. Something like knowing. They knew, and they were complicit in maintaining the town's sinister equilibrium. The nights were the worst. The darkness that consumed Havenwood seeped into his dreams, turning the familiar landscape into a terrifying nightmare. The whispering children, their ghostly forms drifting through the shadows, their eyes wide with an eternal terror. And the man from the diary, his gaunt face forever etched in his nightmares, his hollow eyes following his every move. He found himself drawn back to the school, the place where many of his fragmented memories were anchored. The cold stone walls seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, the shadows stretching and lengthening into menacing figures. The air hung heavy with the memory of screams, the echo of laughter suddenly transforming into a symphony of terror. He explored the old abandoned schoolhouse, driven by a morbid curiosity. He found more than just old textbooks and dusty furniture. He found hidden compartments, cryptic symbols carved into the desks, and a disturbing collection of photographs. Faded images of children, their faces blurred, their expressions filled with a chilling mixture of fear and resignation. Each photo felt like a blow to the gut, ripping open yet another scar on his memory. He spent days and nights poring over these photographs, searching for any clues that might connect them to the events described in the diary. It was a relentless game of cat and mouse, a relentless chase to unravel a truth that seemed always to slip from his grasp. Every answer unearthed only led to more questions, more doubts, more disturbing revelations. As he delved deeper into the secrets of Havenwood, he realized the scope of the horror was far larger than he had ever imagined. The missing children were not just isolated incidents. They were part of a larger, more sinister ritual, a sacrifice designed to appease ancient, malevolent entities. The town's collective amnesia wasn't simply a matter of forgotten trauma. It was a deliberate act of suppression, a conspiracy to conceal a horrifying truth that threatened to shatter the very foundations of Havenwood's existence. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't just uncovering a cold case. He was unearthing a generational curse, a cycle of violence and sacrifice that extended far beyond 1973. He was confronting not just the darkness of Havenwood, but the darkness within himself, the buried trauma that had shaped his identity, his very being. He was a conduit, a living testament to the town's horrific secret. He was a survivor, but his survival came at a terrible price. He felt a creeping sense of despair, a realization that he might never truly escape the grip of Havenwood's malevolent past. He was trapped in a relentless cycle of memory and horror, a prisoner of his own fractured psyche. He wondered if he could bear the weight of this knowledge, if he could withstand the relentless assault of the horrifying truths that continued to unravel before him. The line between the sanity and madness seemed to blur with each passing moment, the chilling realization that he was more a part of Havenwood's nightmare than he had ever imagined. His fight for survival was not just against the town's dark secrets, but against the encroaching darkness within himself. The weight of Havenwood's secrets pressed down on him, a physical burden that threatened to crush him. He couldn't live with the knowledge, locked away in his shattered memories, anymore. He had to act. He had to break the silence. This wasn't just about his own past. It was about the missing children, about the generations of silenced suffering. It was about justice. He decided then and there, in the chilling stillness of the abandoned schoolhouse, surrounded by the ghostly whispers of the past, that he would expose Havenwood. He would shatter the town's carefully constructed facade of normalcy, revealing the festering corruption beneath. It was a reckless gamble, a desperate act of defiance against a town steeped in centuries of dark rituals and collective amnesia. His first move was to collect tangible evidence. He meticulously documented his findings, the photographs, the cryptic symbols, the diary entries. Each piece of evidence was a brick in the wall he was building to expose Havenwood's monstrous secret. He meticulously copied the diary, creating a duplicate that he could leave behind as a form of insurance, should anything happen to him. He knew he was walking a tightrope, balancing on the precipice of oblivion, but the need to expose the truth was a stronger force than fear. He then decided to contact the outside world, reaching out to a journalist he found through an old college contact, a woman named Sarah Miller, known for her investigative reporting on unsolved crimes. He sent her a heavily encrypted email, a carefully crafted message containing the most incriminating pieces of evidence, carefully chosen photographs and transcriptions from the diary. hoping she would see the importance of his findings. The email was a digital lifeline thrown into the dark abyss of the internet, a gamble that could either lead to redemption or his ultimate destruction. The response from Sarah Miller was swift and encouraging. She agreed to meet him, showing a sense of urgency that mirrored his own desperate need to expose the truth. They arranged to meet at a secluded spot outside of Havenwood, a place far enough from the watchful eyes of Sheriff Brody and his cohorts. The meeting was a clandestine rendezvous, a risky undertaking, but Alex had little left to lose. The meeting was tense. Sarah, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, listened intently as Alex laid out his story, presenting the irrefutable evidence he had painstakingly collected. The burden of his memories, the weight of his accusations, was palpable, hanging heavy in the air between them. She saw the haunted look in his eyes, the deep-seated trauma etched into his features, and she believed him. Sarah's commitment invigorated him, a glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. With her help, he decided to stage a public confrontation, a calculated risk to expose Havenwood's secrets. He knew it would be dangerous. The town had a long history of silencing dissent, of protecting its horrifying secrets at all costs. But he was prepared for the fallout. The following day, he held a press conference in the town square. He stood before the silent, watchful townsfolk and the assembled reporters, his voice shaking slightly, but his resolve unwavering. He unveiled his evidence, the photographs, the diary entries, the chilling account of ritual sacrifice and generational complicity. His voice echoed across the silent square, each word a sharp, accusing dagger, piercing through the town's carefully constructed veil of denial. The initial reaction was one of stunned silence, a collective gasp from a community accustomed to secrets. The silence was broken by a cacophony of shouts, accusations, and denials. Sheriff Brody, his face contorted with rage and fear, attempted to silence him, but Alex refused to back down. He had come too far to surrender now. The town erupted into chaos. The townsfolk, their masks of normalcy ripped away, revealed their true faces: fear, anger, and a chilling complicity. Some vehemently denied the accusations, their voices laced with a desperate need to maintain the status quo. Others, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and guilt, shifted nervously, their silence speaking volumes. Sarah Miller, ever professional, was already documenting the chaos, her camera capturing the turmoil, the raw emotion, the unraveling of Havenwood's carefully crafted lies. The ensuing struggle was nothing short of a battle, a clash between truth and deception. Alex found himself physically confronting those who had participated in the sinister rituals, those who had stood by and allowed the horrors to continue. He fought back, fueled by a righteous rage that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. The fight was brutal, a desperate struggle against the forces of darkness that had held Havenwood captive for generations. The night ended with injuries on both sides, an escalation of the conflict that had shaken Havenwood to its core. Yet, Alex's actions had had their effect. The seed of doubt had been sown, the lie exposed. The silence, once impenetrable, had been shattered. The repercussions of his gamble were far-reaching and unpredictable, but the first step towards healing had been made. The fight for justice, the fight for Havenwood's salvation, was far from over, but Alex knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his being, that he had done the right thing. He had risked everything, and in doing so, he had given Havenwood a chance to confront its darkest secrets, to finally begin the long, arduous journey towards redemption. The fight for his own sanity, however, was far from over. The memories, the nightmares, remained constant reminders of the horrors he had endured and the battles still to come. But for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope, a belief that even Havenwood, with all its darkness, could be redeemed. The press conference had been a wildfire, igniting a blaze of chaos that consumed Havenwood. The initial shock gave way to a furious backlash. Those who had benefited from the town's dark secret, the wealthy landowners, the complacent church officials, the perpetually silent Sheriff Brody. They rallied, their carefully constructed facades crumbling under the weight of Alex's accusations. The air crackled with a palpable tension, a silent threat hanging heavy over the town. But Alex refused to be intimidated. He had planted the seed of doubt, and he would not allow it to be uprooted. Sarah Miller, a whirlwind of focused energy, moved through the throng of reporters and angry townsfolk, her camera constantly rolling. She was documenting everything. The fear in the eyes of the guilty, the righteous fury of the newly awakened, the raw, unfiltered truth pouring out from a town that had been suffocating under its own lies for decades. She caught Alex's eye, a silent acknowledgement of their shared mission, a silent promise of continued support. That night, under the cloak of darkness, the true confrontation began. It wasn't a dramatic showdown in the town square, bathed in the harsh glare of floodlights. Instead, it was a series of clandestine encounters, a relentless pursuit of truth through the shadowy alleys and abandoned buildings that formed Havenwood's underbelly. He found himself drawn to the old Blackwood Manor, the imposing silhouette against the moonlit sky, a stark reminder of the town's dark history. It was here, amidst the decaying grandeur, the ghosts of past atrocities clinging to the very stones, that he discovered the truth. Not all of it at once, but in pieces, like fragments of a shattered mirror reflecting a distorted image of the past. It was a slow, agonizing process, a peeling back of layers of deception, each revelation more horrifying than the last. He discovered a hidden room, concealed behind a loose panel in the library, a chamber filled with dusty boxes and decaying documents. Inside, he found not only more diary entries, but also photographs. Horrifying images depicting the ritualistic sacrifices, the chilling complicity of the town's elite, the systematic abuse of children. The images were far more graphic, more deeply disturbing than anything he had seen before. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him, a visceral reaction to the horrors he was uncovering. And then he saw her, or rather, her image. A faded photograph of a young girl, her eyes filled with a haunting mixture of fear and resignation. The girl bore a striking resemblance to him. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the missing link that connected him to the events of 1973. He felt a cold dread grip his heart, a horrifying realization dawning upon him. He wasn't just uncovering the town's dark secret. He was uncovering his own buried past. The realization struck him with the force of a physical blow, shattering the carefully constructed walls of his repressed memories. He remembered now, fragmented and incomplete, the fear, the pain, the chilling rituals. He remembered his mother's desperate pleas, her terrified eyes reflecting the shadows that haunted Havenwood. He remembered the faces of the perpetrators, their chilling smiles a haunting reminder of his past. His pursuit led him to Elias Thorne, the patriarch of Havenwood's wealthiest family, the man who, according to the evidence, was the orchestrator of the 1973 events. Thorne was old, frail, his eyes sunken and shadowed, but his gaze held a chilling intensity, a flicker of the power he once wielded. The confrontation was not a physical struggle. It was a psychological battle, a duel of wills between victim and perpetrator. Thorne didn't deny his involvement. Instead, he confessed, his voice a raspy whisper, laced with chilling justification. He spoke of ancient traditions, of sacrifices meant to appease dark forces, of generational complicity that had twisted the town's soul. He spoke of a pact made with darkness, a bond that had held Havenwood captive for centuries. His confession was a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity, a confession that chilled Alex to the bone. The confrontation wasn't just about the past, it was about the future. Thorne revealed a plan, a continuation of the rituals, a desperate attempt to maintain the pact with darkness. He had planned to sacrifice another child, to appease the malevolent forces that he claimed held the town in their thrall. Alex knew, with a chilling certainty, that Thorne's claim wasn't completely unfounded. The evidence, the town's history, suggested a horrifying symbiosis between Heavenwood and something far older, far more sinister. The final confrontation wasn't a physical fight, but a struggle against the suffocating weight of the town's dark legacy. It was a test of Alex's will, his resilience, his commitment to breaking the cycle of violence and abuse. He faced Thorn not with fists, but with the unwavering strength of his resolve, the unwavering conviction of his truth. He faced not only Thorn, but the collective guilt of Havenwood, the shadowed history that clung to the very air they breathed. The resolution wasn't a neat, tidy ending. There was no satisfying arrest, no clean resolution. Instead, there was an unsettling quietude, a tense calm following the storm. Thorn's confession, though devastating, wasn't enough to dismantle the deep-rooted power structures that had enabled the atrocities. The town remained, its secrets partially revealed, but its darkness still lingering, like a persistent shadow. Alex, despite the victory, was left with the unsettling truth of his own past, the realization of his own connection to Havenwood's darkest history. He had fought for justice, for the truth, but the battle had left scars, both visible and invisible, wounds that would likely never fully heal. The memories, the nightmares, remained. The fight for his sanity, for his peace of mind, would continue long after the dust settled on Havenwood's shocking revelations. The future of Havenwood remained uncertain. The town faced a long road to healing, a journey of confronting its dark past and rebuilding its shattered community. The legal ramifications of Thorn's confession would play out, but the true healing, the real reconciliation, would require far more than just legal justice. It would require a painful, prolonged process of self-reflection, a collective acknowledgement of guilt, and a conscious commitment to breaking the cycle of violence and abuse. The journey would be long and arduous, but Alex's actions had illuminated a path forward, a flickering hope in the suffocating darkness. He had confronted the truth, and in doing so, he had given Havenwood a chance, however slim, at redemption. But his own personal journey towards peace remained just as uncertain as the town's future. The weight of the past, the burden of his memories, continued to press down upon him, a constant reminder of the darkness he had fought, and the battles yet to come. Chapter 4. Resolution and Aftermath. The old Blackwood Manor stood silent, a monument to generations of secrets. The air hung heavy with the lingering scent of decay and the ghosts of forgotten rituals. Inside, the dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating the stark emptiness of the rooms. Alex sat in the library, the chilling weight of Thorn's confession pressing down on him. The documents, the photographs, the chilling details, they were all real, a tangible manifestation of Havenwood's horrifying history. He felt a bone-deep weariness, the kind that seeped into his soul, leaving him drained and hollow. He hadn't slept properly in days. Sleep offered no escape, only a descent into a labyrinth of nightmares, a relentless replay of fragmented memories, the chilling faces of the perpetrators, his mother's terrified eyes, the echoing cries of the victims. The images burned themselves onto his eyelids, a grotesque tapestry woven from his own subconscious, a constant reminder of the horrors he'd unearthed. He found himself constantly reaching out, his fingers tracing the phantom lines of his mother's face, his touch falling on empty air. The loss echoed through his soul, a constant ache. Sarah arrived the following morning, her face etched with concern. She had witnessed the fallout of Alex's revelations firsthand, the raw emotion of the townspeople, the simmering rage of those who felt exposed. She brought coffee, black and strong, the kind that burned going down, but offered a temporary reprieve from the icy grip of despair. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth, a small flame against the encroaching darkness that still clung to Havenwood. "It's not over," Sarah finally said, her voice low, a stark contrast to the intensity of her gaze. "This is just the beginning." Alex nodded, his gaze fixed on the dying embers. He knew she was right. Thorn's confession. while a critical step towards justice, hadn't brought about any form of immediate resolution. The town was fractured, the truth a jagged shard tearing through the carefully woven fabric of its existence. The wealthy families, still clinging to their power and influence, were fighting back, using their resources and connections to minimize the damage, to bury the truth once again under layers of denial and deceit. The sheriff, though outwardly supportive, was maneuvering to control the narrative, subtly diverting the attention away from the full scope of the crimes. The legal battle that followed was long and arduous. Thorne, despite his confession, played the role of a frail, broken old man, his defense team spinning the web of doubt around his words, painting him as a victim of his own delusion. The other perpetrators, shielded by a network of complicity and silence, managed to avoid any significant charges, their wealth and influence allowing them to escape accountability. The town was divided, polarized into those who embraced the truth and those who clung to their comfortable lies. Sarah's footage, however, was undeniable. Her relentless documentation of the events, the testimonies of the survivors, the overwhelming evidence. It was a powerful weapon, capable of shaking the foundations of Havenwood's carefully constructed reality. She worked tirelessly, sharing her footage with news outlets, lobbying for greater accountability. She became a relentless advocate, a voice for the silenced, a beacon of truth in a sea of lies. Alex, meanwhile, retreated. He needed time, not just to process the trauma of his past, but also to reconcile the unsettling truth of his own connection to Havenwood. He sought therapy, attempting to piece together the shattered fragments of his memories, to understand the depth of the abuse he had suffered as a child. The therapy sessions were grueling. Each step forward met with resistance from the deeply ingrained trauma he carried. He battled nightmares, flashbacks, and the constant threat of losing himself in the abyss of his past. The path to healing was long and winding, filled with painful self-discovery and the slow, agonizing process of confronting his suppressed memories. He began to understand the complex psychological mechanisms that allowed such abuse to take root and flourish in Havenwood. He understood the insidious manipulation, the systematic indoctrination, the carefully constructed systems of control that had held the town captive for generations. Slowly, painstakingly, he started to rebuild his life. He moved away from Havenwood, the distance providing a necessary buffer from the oppressive weight of the town's dark history. He found solace in writing, pouring his experiences and his observations into his work, crafting a cathartic narrative that allowed him to process the trauma he had endured. But Havenwood never truly left him. It remained a part of him, woven into the fabric of his being, a haunting reminder of the darkness he had faced. He knew that the battle for justice was far from over, that the true healing of the town was a long and arduous process. The legal ramifications of Thorne's confession had merely scratched the surface. The deep-seated cultural issues, the generational trauma, the legacy of complicity. These were wounds that would take years, perhaps generations, to heal. Yet, he held onto a fragile hope, a belief that the seeds of truth he had planted would eventually blossom into a brighter future for Havenwood, a future free from the shadow of its dark past. He found a quiet peace in accepting the ambiguity, the ongoing struggle. He understood that there were no easy answers, no neat conclusions. His personal journey towards wholeness, like Havenwood's path towards redemption, was an ongoing process, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of truth, and the ever-present struggle between light and darkness. The story of Havenwood would continue, its echoes reverberating through the generations, a constant reminder of the fragility of innocence and the enduring strength of the human will to survive. The fight was far from over, but Alex had found a strength within himself, a resolve to continue the battle, not just for justice, but for the possibility of healing, for himself, and for the town that had forever shaped his destiny. The darkness lingered, but within that darkness, a small, fragile light had been kindled, a beacon of hope in the long, arduous journey towards redemption. The abandoned school stood as a silent testament to the horrors he'd uncovered. a physical manifestation of Havenwood's shadowed history. Even from a distance, its decaying walls seemed to whisper secrets, the broken windows like empty eye sockets staring out at the world. He hadn't returned since the discovery, yet the imagery remained vivid, etched into his memory like a grotesque painting. The peeling paint, the shattered glass, the chilling silence. All of it a constant reminder of the atrocities committed within those walls. The air itself felt thick with the weight of untold suffering, the lingering scent of decay clinging to his clothes long after he left. His therapist, a kind woman with wise, understanding eyes, encouraged him to confront his past, to explore the depths of his trauma through writing. She believed that the act of putting his experiences into words would be a cathartic process, a means of reclaiming his narrative, of wresting control from the memories that haunted him. Initially, he resisted, the very thought of reliving those experiences causing a visceral wave of nausea. The buried memories, long suppressed, clawed at the edges of his consciousness, threatening to overwhelm him. But slowly, hesitantly, he began to write. His initial attempts were fragmented, disjointed, filled with gaps and silences. The words seemed to stumble out, awkward and hesitant, reflecting the chaotic state of his own mind. He wrote of the chilling isolation, the pervasive sense of fear, the constant vigilance required to navigate his childhood. He described the oppressive atmosphere of the town, the subtle signs of complicity and silence that permeated every aspect of life. He detailed the insidious manipulation, the carefully crafted lies that masked the horrific truth. He wrote of his mother, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and resignation, her quiet strength a testament to her resilience amidst overwhelming adversity. He wrote of the moments of kindness, the small acts of defiance, the flicker of hope that had sustained them through their ordeal. He wrote of his own desperate attempts to make sense of the world, to find a semblance of normalcy in a reality that was anything but. As he wrote, a strange thing began to happen. The fragmented memories began to coalesce, to find shape and form. The gaps filled in, the silences broken. He discovered details he hadn't consciously remembered, buried deep within the recesses of his subconscious. The writing itself became a form of excavation, unearthing layers of suppressed emotions, buried truths, and forgotten experiences. Each word written was a step closer to understanding, to healing. The process was slow and arduous, often painful, marked by moments of intense emotional upheaval. There were days when the memories were so overwhelming that he couldn't bear to continue, when the sheer weight of his past threatened to crush him. But he persevered, driven by a desire to understand, to heal, to find a way to reconcile with the past and move towards a future free from the shadow of Havenwood's darkness. His writing began to take on a life of its own, evolving from fragmented recollections into a cohesive narrative. He developed characters based on the people he'd known, both victims and perpetrators, drawing from his memories, his observations, and his growing understanding of the psychological dynamics that had shaped Havenwood's dark history. He created a fictional town that mirrored his own experiences, blending reality and fiction in a way that allowed him to process his trauma without reliving it directly. The act of writing became a form of self-therapy, a means of confronting his demons and emerging victorious. The story became a way for him to give voice to the silenced, to acknowledge their suffering, and to honor their resilience. He poured his anger, his sadness, his fear, and his eventual triumph into the story, allowing himself to feel the full spectrum of his emotions without judgment. He wrote about the town's complicity, the way silence had allowed the abuse to continue for generations. He wrote about the insidious nature of power and the way it could corrupt even the most seemingly good people. He explored the complex dynamics of family, the ways in which dysfunction and abuse could be passed down from one generation to the next, creating a cycle of pain that was difficult to break. As he delved deeper into his writing, he began to understand the depth of his own trauma, the extent to which his identity had been shaped by the abuse he had suffered. He recognized the ways in which his experiences had impacted his relationships, his self-perception, and his overall sense of well-being. He realized that healing wasn't a linear process, but rather a journey, a winding path with setbacks and triumphs along the way. Through writing, he began to reclaim his narrative, to take control of the story of his life. He moved beyond the victim narrative, transforming his experiences into a source of strength and resilience. His writing became his refuge, his sanctuary, a place where he could confront his demons and emerge stronger, wiser, and more empowered. It allowed him to move from a place of pain and despair to one of healing, understanding, and acceptance. The distance from Havenwood was crucial to his healing. The physical separation provided the emotional space he needed to process his experiences without the constant trigger of familiar sights and sounds. He found a new community, supportive friends, and a sense of belonging he'd never experienced before. He learned to trust again, to form healthy relationships, and to build a life based on love, respect, and mutual support. Yet, despite his progress, the shadows of Havenwood lingered. The memories of his childhood remained a part of him, woven into the fabric of his identity. They were a reminder of the darkness he'd faced, a testament to his resilience, and a source of motivation to continue his fight for justice and healing. He understood that his journey was a marathon, not a sprint. There would be days when the past threatened to engulf him, when the pain felt too raw, too overwhelming to bear. But he would always have his writing, his strength, and the enduring hope for a future where justice and healing could prevail. His story and the story of Havenwood remained unfinished, a testament to the enduring power of the past and the ongoing struggle for redemption. The wounds might never fully heal, but they could scar, they could fade, they could become a mark of survival rather than a mark of defeat. The fight for justice continued, the fight for healing continued, but Alex, armed with his memories and his words, was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The new beginning, though uncertain, was filled with a fragile yet unwavering hope. The revelation didn't shatter Havenwood like a dropped anvil, but rather fractured it along pre-existing fault lines, exposing the deep fissures of complicity and denial that had run through its veins for generations. The initial shock rippled outward from the core of the scandal, the abandoned school, now a chilling monument to the town's dark secret, spreading like a stain across the placid surface of everyday life. There were whispers, initially hushed and hesitant, then growing louder, more insistent, as the truth, once buried deep, began to claw its way to the surface. Old Mrs. Gable, whose son had been implicated in the past abuses, retreated further into her shell, her once bright eyes now clouded with a sorrow that went beyond simple grief. She hadn't spoken much before, but now, her silence was heavier, a palpable wall between her and the rest of the community. The younger generation, those who had been shielded from the worst of it, struggled to reconcile the idyllic Havenwood of their childhood memories with the monstrous reality that now lay exposed. The town's annual summer festival, usually a vibrant celebration of community spirit, was muted that year. The laughter seemed forced, the smiles strained. The air, once thick with the scent of barbecue and popcorn, now carried the heavy aroma of unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. Conversations that had once flowed freely now faltered, halting at the edges of the unspeakable. Friendships, forged over decades, fractured under the weight of revelation. The town's tightly knit fabric, once seemingly impenetrable, began to unravel thread by thread. Sheriff Brody, a man weathered by years of upholding the town's precarious peace, found himself in the eye of the storm. His own family had been intertwined with Havenwood's history, albeit indirectly, and he was forced to confront his own complicity in turning a blind eye to the unspoken truths that festered beneath the surface. The burden of responsibility weighed heavily upon him, the weight of years of collective silence pressing down on his weary shoulders. He initiated a painstaking investigation, meticulously documenting the past abuses, piecing together the broken fragments of the town's memory. The church, once a pillar of the community, was divided. Reverend Miller, a man of strong faith and even stronger convictions, preached forgiveness and reconciliation, urging his flock to confront their past and move forward together. But his pleas fell on deaf ears in some quarters. Others, consumed by anger and betrayal, blamed the church for its complicity in shielding the abusers, for turning a blind eye to the suffering of the victims. The sacred space was tainted by the echoes of unspoken accusations, the whispers of doubt and resentment replacing the hymns and prayers. The school board, grappling with the legacy of the abandoned school and the decades of abuse that had occurred within its walls, faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust. Parents, shaken by the revelations, withdrew their children from the town's schools, fearing the lingering effects of the town's dark past. The once thriving educational institution found itself grappling with dwindling enrollment and a crisis of confidence. The future of Havenwood's children, once seen as bright and promising, now seemed uncertain, clouded by the shadows of the town's history. The economic impact was devastating. Tourism, the town's primary source of income, plummeted. Visitors, once drawn to Havenwood's quaint charm and peaceful atmosphere, stayed away, deterred by the dark cloud of scandal that hung over the town. Businesses closed, families moved away, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of what was once a thriving community. The vibrant heart of Havenwood, once beating with life and energy, began to slow, its rhythm faltering under the weight of its collective guilt. The legal ramifications were complex and drawn out. Some perpetrators, long since escaped the town, were hunted down and prosecuted. Others, dead or too ill to stand trial, were spared the consequences of their actions, leaving a bitter taste of injustice in the mouths of the victims. The civil lawsuits, however, were numerous, their outcomes varied and often unsatisfying. The town, financially strained, struggled to pay the settlements, further exacerbating its economic woes. Yet, amidst the darkness, a flicker of hope remained. A support group formed, led by survivors who found strength in their shared experience. These brave individuals, once silenced and isolated, found their voices, sharing their stories, their pain, and their resilience. Their willingness to speak out, to break the cycle of silence, offered a glimmer of hope for healing and reconciliation. Their strength became an inspiration for others, encouraging them to confront their own pasts and to seek justice and healing. The town's transformation wouldn't be quick nor easy. The scars of the past were deep and would take time to heal. The journey to accountability and reconciliation would be long and arduous, fraught with setbacks and challenges. But the seed of change had been sown, a seed nurtured by the courage of the survivors and the willingness of some within the community to confront the dark truths that had haunted Havenwood for so long. The future remained uncertain, but the path forward, however difficult, had been forged. Havenwood's story, a tale of darkness and despair, was slowly evolving into one of redemption, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of truth and accountability. The weight of the town's burden, while still heavy, was now shared, a shared responsibility to build a future free from the shadows of its past. The air, while not yet clear, carried a faint scent of possibility, a fragile hope for healing and a promise of a brighter dawn. The echoes of the past lingered, but they were no longer the dominant voice in Havenwood's story. The narrative was shifting, slowly but surely, towards a future where justice and healing could coexist, where the whispers of the past could finally give way to the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The trial concluded, the guilty sentenced, but the silence that had cloaked Havenwood for decades hadn't entirely lifted. It clung to the air like the damp chill of November fog, a persistent reminder of the darkness that had festered beneath the town's idyllic facade. While justice, in its clumsy, imperfect way, had been served, a sense of unease persisted, a subtle tremor in the newly laid foundations of the town's fragile recovery. The weight of the past, though lessened, still pressed down, a heavy blanket stifling the hopeful whispers of a brighter future. Sheriff Brody, his face etched with the weariness of a long and arduous battle, found himself strangely adrift. The investigation, the arrests, the trials, they were all behind him, Yet the sense of resolution felt illusory, a thin veneer over a chasm of unresolved grief and lingering questions. He walked the familiar streets of Havenwood, the houses now seeming smaller, the shadows longer, the familiar faces bearing a new, unsettling fragility. He'd seen too much, known too much, and the burden of that knowledge pressed heavily on his shoulders. He'd hoped for closure, for a sense of peace, but the quietude of Havenwood now felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken secrets. The air itself seemed to hum with a low, unresolved dissonance. The abandoned school stood as a silent sentinel, its broken windows staring blankly out at the world. Despite the demolition crews having begun their work, clearing away the debris of decades of abuse, the building still radiated a palpable sense of dread. It was a tangible reminder of the town's collective failure, a monument to the years of silence and complicity. Even with its decaying walls coming down, the memories, the lingering echoes of screams and whispered pleas, remained, woven into the very fabric of the land. Brody found himself drawn to the site, often standing for hours, simply gazing at the wreckage, haunted by the ghosts of what had happened within those walls. He couldn't shake the feeling that some pieces of the puzzle remained stubbornly hidden, deliberately obscured by the passage of time and the convenient amnesia of many residents. Mrs. Gable's house remained shuttered, a dark, brooding presence on the edge of town. Her silence had deepened, evolving into a profound withdrawal from the community, her grief an impenetrable fortress. The few who attempted to reach her were met with icy silence, or worse, a fleeting glimpse of a profound, chilling despair that spoke volumes about the depth of her loss and the lingering trauma she carried. Her son's fate remained a stark reminder of the incompleteness of justice, a chilling echo in the aftermath of the trials. The annual summer festival, a pallid imitation of its former vibrancy, had taken place, a strangely muted affair. The laughter felt forced, the smiles strained, the celebratory air replaced by a pervasive sense of unease. The community, though attempting to rebuild, felt fractured, the fissures of the past too deep, the scars too raw for true healing to take hold immediately. The shared experience had brought them closer in some ways, but also driven them further apart, the revelation of the town's dark secret, highlighting the existing fault lines within the community. Reverend Miller, though well-intentioned, struggled to guide his congregation towards reconciliation. His sermons, once filled with hope and optimism, now carried a note of weary resignation. The church, once a pillar of the community, remained divided, the weight of its past complicity heavy upon its collective conscience. The whispers of doubt and resentment persisted, undermining the pastor's efforts to foster healing and forgiveness. The weight of collective guilt proved heavier than any sermon could bear. The school board, battling dwindling enrollment and a crisis of confidence, worked tirelessly to rebuild the trust of the community. Yet, the shadows of the past lingered, casting a pall over the children's future. The fear of lingering trauma clung to the parents, impeding their ability to move forward. The abandoned school, despite its impending demolition, acted as a constant, visible reminder of the pain inflicted upon those children within its walls. The economic downturn continued, the town's once thriving tourism industry still struggling to recover. The taint of scandal lingered, casting a long shadow over Havenwood's reputation. Many families had moved away, seeking a fresh start, a life unburdened by the weight of the town's dark history. The empty storefronts served as stark reminders of the town's economic fragility and its struggle to reestablish its identity. The support group, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness, proved to be a lifeline for the survivors. Their shared experiences fostered a sense of solidarity and strength, but the healing process was long and arduous, marked by periods of progress and heartbreaking setbacks. They found solace in their collective voice, but the trauma they endured continued to shape their lives, casting long shadows over their futures. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the palpable sense of unease that hung over Havenwood began to shift subtly, evolving into something less tangible, yet perhaps more profound. It was a feeling of incompleteness, a nagging suspicion that not all the secrets had been unearthed, not all the truth revealed. The official narrative offered a semblance of closure, but beneath the surface, whispers persisted, hinting at deeper, more sinister connections, at threads of the story that remained stubbornly unraveled. One chilly evening, Sheriff Brody found an old leather-bound journal tucked away in the attic of the abandoned school, a forgotten artifact salvaged from the demolition. The journal, its pages brittle with age, belonged to Elias Thorne, a former teacher at the school, whose name had surfaced during the investigation, though his role in the events had remained murky. The journal contained a series of cryptic entries, fragmented memories, and unsettling allusions to events that predated the known abuses by decades. It spoke of occult practices, secret rituals, and a hidden society within Havenwood, its members bound by a pact of silence that stretched back generations. The more Brody read, the more he realized the extent of his ignorance, the depth of Havenwood's hidden darkness. He'd uncovered a significant part of the truth, but now he realized it was just the tip of a very dark iceberg. The journal's revelations sent a fresh wave of unease through Havenwood, a chilling reminder that some secrets run deeper than others, that some wounds never truly heal. The sense of resolution, so carefully constructed, began to crumble, replaced by a deeper, more insidious dread. The town's healing process, already tenuous, now faced a new and unpredictable challenge. The ghosts of Havenwood's past, once thought subdued, stirred once more, their whispers growing louder, their presence more chillingly tangible. The story of Havenwood's reckoning was far from over. The legal battles, the community's struggle for healing, the fight for accountability, these would continue. But now, with the discovery of Thorne's journal, a new chapter began, a darker, more complex exploration into the town's murky history, a chilling reminder that some secrets, once buried, have a habit of returning, their whispers echoing through the generations, a haunting testament to the enduring power of the past. The lingering echoes of Havenwood's secrets, once thought silenced, whispered anew, promising more unease, more mystery, and a future clouded by a chilling ambiguity that clung to the town like the shadow of a long-forgotten crime. The truth, it seemed, was far from being entirely revealed. The demolition of Havenwood Elementary proceeded with a grim efficiency, each crumbling brick a testament to the town's collective failure. The air, thick with the scent of dust and decay, carried the faintest whisper of something else, the lingering ghosts of children's laughter, replaced by the chilling echo of their silenced cries. Even as the bulldozers tore down the walls, the school's legacy clung to the land, a stubborn stain on the town's conscience. The skeletal remains of the playground, rusted swings swaying in the wind like macabre pendulums, served as a stark reminder of the innocence lost within those walls. Sheriff Brody watched the process, a quiet observer in the midst of the controlled chaos. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a replay of a nightmare he couldn't quite shake. The physical destruction of the building seemed insufficient, a mere superficial act compared to the deep-seated wounds it represented. The school wasn't just bricks and mortar. It was a repository of pain, fear, and unspeakable secrets. Its demolition was a symbolic act, an attempt to erase the physical manifestation of trauma, but the memories, the scars, remained etched into the hearts and minds of those who had lived through its horrors. The unearthed journal had revealed a chilling truth. The abuse hadn't been a recent phenomenon. Elias Thorne's meticulous entries detailed a history of secretive rituals, occult practices, and a clandestine society operating within the shadows of Havenwood, a darkness that had festered for generations. The journal spoke of a twisted legacy passed down through time, a network of complicity that had allowed the abuse to continue unchecked for decades, each generation perpetuating the cycle of silence and suffering. This revelation cast a new shadow over the town's recovery. The initial sense of relief, the fragile peace that had followed the trials, began to crumble under the weight of this newly uncovered truth. The community, already struggling to heal, now faced a deeper, more insidious challenge. The legacy of a secret society that had tainted the very foundations of Havenwood's identity. The whispers of doubt grew louder, the fissures in the community widened, the fragile trust shattered once more. Mrs. Gable, still cloistered in her darkened home, became even more withdrawn. The discovery of the journal, the revelation of Havenwood's deeper, darker past, seemed to plunge her further into despair. Her silence became a palpable entity, a wall of grief and trauma that no one could breach. The image of her son, his innocence stolen, haunted the town, a constant reminder of the devastating consequences of Havenwood's long-standing secrets. Reverend Miller's sermons, already tinged with weariness, now reflected a profound sense of disillusionment. His attempts to guide the congregation toward healing and forgiveness seemed futile in the face of the chilling revelations contained within Thorne's journal. The weight of collective guilt, the realization of their ancestors' complicity, proved too heavy for even his unwavering faith to bear. The church, once a pillar of strength, found itself torn apart, its foundation crumbling beneath the burden of its hidden history. The community's collective conscience, once burdened by the recent events, now bore the additional weight of generations of secrets, pushing many to the brink of despair. The school board, facing an even steeper crisis, struggled to navigate the turbulent aftermath of the revelations. The dwindling enrollment, already a concern, plummeted even further. Parents, grappling with the lingering effects of the abuse and the chilling new information, hesitated to enroll their children in Havenwood schools, fearing the lingering presence of a darkness that seemed woven into the very fabric of the town. The future of the town's education system seemed uncertain, hanging precariously between hope and despair. The economic downturn worsened. The once thriving tourism industry remained stagnant, hindered by the continuing negative publicity surrounding the town's dark history. The shadow of scandal, once a temporary blight, had become a permanent fixture, casting a chilling pall over Havenwood's image and future prospects. The empty storefronts served as constant reminders of the town's economic vulnerability and its struggle to rebuild its shattered identity. The support group, despite its ongoing efforts, found itself facing a new wave of trauma. The journal's revelations served as a brutal reminder that their suffering wasn't an isolated incident, but rather a continuation of a long, unbroken chain of abuse. Many members retreated into themselves, grappling with the realization that the harm they had endured wasn't merely an anomaly, but a continuation of a deeper, more systemic evil. The support group continued to meet, to provide a sanctuary for the survivors to process this newly uncovered layer of pain and sorrow. However, the atmosphere shifted, their initial sense of unity now infused with a profound sense of shared historical trauma, a weight that tested the strength of their bonds. Sheriff Brody, burdened by the weight of his discoveries, continued his investigation into Thorne's journal, unraveling the intricate web of secrets and connections. He found himself immersed in a world of hidden societies, cryptic symbols, and long-forgotten rituals, a world that stretched back centuries, its tendrils intertwined with the very foundation of Havenwood. He uncovered evidence of a system of indoctrination and control, a carefully constructed hierarchy designed to maintain the cycle of abuse and secrecy. The journal's entries, fragmented and cryptic, forced Brody to piece together a history obscured by deliberate obfuscation. He found mentions of individuals who had played key roles, their names echoing through Havenwood's history, revealing generations of complicity and willful blindness. He spent countless nights poring over the journal, the faint scent of aged leather and decaying paper clinging to his hands, feeling the chilling weight of the past as he deciphered the cryptic clues left behind. The further he delved, the more he realized the full extent of the town's depravity. The deeper Brody dug, the more he realized that the resolution he had sought was an illusion, a temporary reprieve in the face of a far more profound and entrenched darkness. The official narrative, the trials, the sentences, they were but superficial scratches on the surface of a much deeper wound. Havenwood's true history was far more complex, far more sinister. A tapestry woven with threads of secrecy, manipulation, and unspeakable cruelty that stretched back centuries, haunting the town like a malevolent spirit. The journal revealed the existence of a hidden graveyard, a forgotten site where the victims of Havenwood's darkest secrets lay buried, their stories lost to time. Brody began excavating, the ground yielding its disturbing truths as the long-hidden graves began to surface. Each unearthed skeleton was a chilling testament to the town's buried past, its silence broken by the skeletal remains of those whose suffering had been so long ignored. As the full horror of Havenwood's true history began to unfold, the town faced a reckoning unlike any it had experienced before. The initial trauma of the recent abuse was compounded by the weight of generations of secrets, of a history deliberately obscured, a darkness carefully cultivated and maintained for centuries. The road to healing, once seemingly clear, became shrouded in a new and unpredictable darkness. A long and arduous journey that lay before a community fractured by the weight of its past, burdened by the truth of its deeply hidden history. The legacy of Havenwood Elementary was not merely a symbol of recent tragedy, it was a monument to a far older, and far more pervasive, evil, a reminder that some secrets, once buried, have a way of returning to haunt the living.